Morning, everybody. My name is Jim Jenkins, and I want to welcome to the 14th Annual Canadian Fertilizer Products Forum. As I said, my name is Jim Jenkins. I work at Nutrien, and I'm the chair of the Fertilizer Canada's Product Committee. And I, along with Suzanne Beatty, will be your moderators for what's called affectionately CFIA Day, or Canadian Food Inspection Agency Day. So please, I'd like to introduce Suzanne Beatty.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Beatty, and I'm from Premier Tech, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Fertilizer Canada Products Committee. Fertilizer Canada, in joint partnership with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Fertilizers and Supplements Advisory Committee, hosts this event every year to help ensure that fertilizers and supplements in Canada are globally competitive and that growers have access to new products in a timely manner.
Thank you, Suzanne. So as Suzanne says, this is our fourth session in the series of virtual CFPF. And CFIA Day is part of it that we always look forward to, because this is where we actually, industry players, actually get to hear directly from the regulators in terms of the fertilizer products and supplements. And so usually a very popular day. And I think Suzanne is going to bring up the agenda. I'll just go over it very quickly. While she's doing that, I want to remind you that when you have a question, put it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box. That'll be available at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. And remember, not the chat box. After the presentations, I will read the questions to our speakers to answer. So we're going to go through all this piece. I got a question there about my, so we're going to go through all of the presentations by the CFIA in the first section, and then we're going to have questions at the end. So the overview of the agenda for today is CFIA is going to speak about updates on service delivery standards. They're going to talk about compliance rates and other product-specific guidance information. And very importantly, they're going to give a synopsis of the changes to the fertilizer regulations following the Canada Gazette Part 2 publication. So please hold your questions till later. We will run through those. And just a reminder, if we don't get to all the questions today, Fertilizer Canada will be absorbing all the questions and then sending them out to the appropriate people. So you will get an answer back, and that Q&A information will be available as will all the presentations after the session. So once again, I want to thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to the presenters from CFIA. To begin our session, I would like to hand it over to Linda Webster, who is the director of CFIA, for her quick review of the top, or view from the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim and Suzanne, and thank you, Fertilizer Canada, for helping us host today. Welcome, and thank you for joining this virtual session. As Jim mentioned, my name is Linda Webster, and I'm the director. Part of my responsibilities is the fertilizer safety section. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm pleased that we're able to do so virtually. One of the positive aspects of the current situation is that we've all learned new technologies, how to share screens. Eva this morning learned how to add an emoji to a chat function. So, you know, we're all learning little things, and that is a silver lining. There's obviously challenges though, and so kind of from my view from the top, last year was very business oriented, and I think it's appropriate that this year is a bit more personal in terms of some of the challenges that we're collectively facing, and the fact that while we might not miss the commute to work and might enjoy working in our slippers, we are going to be missing those coffee chats and the more personal contact that we get, and that is true here as well. So I'm sad that I'm not going to be able to have somebody sidle up to me, you know, while we're grabbing a croissant, and to be able to chat about their company or some of the challenges they're facing or some of the things that they're looking forward to. So I'm hoping that through some of the chats and the format that Fertilizer Canada and Jim and Suzanne are going to be leading us through, that we'll be able to try and have that in a virtual sense, but recognize that it's not quite the same. So I think to say that the last 8 months has been interesting is a little bit of an understatement. I know that many of the people in the fertilizer section have been working extremely hard and juggling family care, young children, older parents, sometimes both of them, and all the while making sure that service delivery standards stay as high as they can, and that we're ready for new regulations. So I really do need to say thank you to Eva and the entire team for all of their work and all of their flexibility and resilience during this time. And I'm sure that's true for many of you here on the call as well. Trying to juggle that work-life balance has never been more interesting. So I appreciate that all of you are experiencing the same thing, and I hope that everyone is staying safe and doing whatever you need to do to stay sane. We've spent quite a bit of time in our division talking about how to work optimally, and that's not just getting the work done, but how to stay sane at the same time. So I'm hoping that this will be something that we get used to, and that we're able to rejoice in the lack of travel time and mourn some of the things that we considered normal that aren't possible right now, but that we're able to kind of keep moving forward. And I think one of the things that will help this industry move forward is the fact that we have the regs, the new regulations that were signed by the Governor General on October 26th and published in the Canada Gazette Part 2, which is an important public transparency step, on November 10th. So we talked with Garth and Clyde and Fertilizer Canada about how awkward this meeting would be if we didn't have the regs through, and how you would have to once again talk about the intent of the regulations and not have made the progress. And so I'm super excited not to be in that situation. And thank you to Fertilizer Canada for helping us along that road, and to FSAC for their letters of support that really did it really did help internal to government realize that this was a safe bet moving forward. So we have the new regulations. We're going to be outlining the key changes that are going to be made. As you all know Eva very well, Eva could talk for the entire day about the new regulations, and you would learn tons. We're not, however, going to try and do that. We're going to give a fairly short presentation. It might not feel that partway through it, but it is a fairly short presentation, so that you get the high level overview of the regulations. And the last slide has where the sources of information are available, and we're going to be doing webinars. So there's all the team memos are updated. The website is super clear. I was on it last night perusing, and lots of documents updated. And so there'll be lots of information, so that you'll be able to make the choice to jump over to the new regulations as quickly as possible. You'll note there that I didn't say if you're going to, it's that you will jump over to the new regulations as quickly as possible. I really hope that that we do have the majority of products over as soon as possible, recognizing that there's different considerations for different products and different changes that have to be made. Part of the reason that I'm really hopeful that we are going to make the change smoothly and fairly rapidly is to get us on to the My CFIA. We spoke about this last year, and if you'll remember, I repeated it 3 times. Please get onto My CFIA. This is our electronic platform. It's quite user-friendly, particularly from the client perspective. And so we're really hoping that we can get on to that new platform. That is only available for the new regulations, so that's a bit of an incentive, because that electronic platform will be much smoother. It'll also allow us to continue to lean our processes. One of the things we really recognized that during COVID, when we're all working at home, is that the the amount that that our submissions still come in paper-based format really doesn't allow for a very lean process, because even sometimes we're taking electronic and printing it and bringing it places, and we we need to stop that, because we really don't have the time to be dedicating to pushing paper when we can be actually working on files. So we're really hoping to move to electronic fully and completely as quickly as possible. I'm hoping that some of you were able to explore the My CFIA platform between last year and this year, and that when we get to that session, we'll have a presentation on enrollment to make sure that you're comfortable enrolling. And those of you who have explored the platform, I hope that you'll be able to share your experiences when we get to that section. So I'm going to actually stop talking now, because you're really more interested in hearing from Eva and team. And so I will thank you once again for joining and for having exploring this virtual platform with us. And I look forward to your engagement throughout the rest of the day. Thank you.
Okay.
So I guess back to you, Jim.
Yes. Brandon, can you hear me? Because it says my mute is not working.
I can hear you, Jim.
Yes,
okay,
we can hear you.
Fine. All right, that's good. All right, thank you, Linda, for that wise words. And
Turn your camera on, Jim.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to see my shining face. All right, so now we're going to move. Thanks, Linda, for those wise words. And just a reminder, obviously the message is, if you want your registrations to flow through the system expediently, go digital. All right, so now we're going to move into the rapid fire round, where we have 3 speakers from CFIA, starting with Glenn Murray, and they'll present back to back. Glenn is going to be giving some overview on file statistics, service delivery standards, industry compliance rates, and key issues identified in previous annual meetings. Next up, we will have Brett Tendler presenting on metal standards for fertilizer and supplements intended for use in hydroponics. And finally, we have Natalie Deacon, who will be discussing regulations of products that are or contain polymers under the Fertilizers Act. I'd like to remind you or draw your attention to the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a little globe there that says interpretation, yes. So if you want to experience this in French, you just push that and it moves along, and we have interpreters available. So when we get to the question section, we'll ask if there's a question in French. My French is not so good, so we'll ask the interpreter to ask the question and do that in 2 languages. So really, Glenn, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I'll just get my presentation up here. Now, hopefully that's working okay for everybody. Okay, I'll sort of second what Linda was saying at the start there in regards to virtual makes things a lot easier, but I certainly miss seeing everybody at this meeting. Every year it's a chance to reconnect with people or to meet new people, and that's something I do miss. Unless, of course, you're someone who likes to corner me and grill me, in which case it's great that it's virtual this year. My presentation this year will be a little quicker than normal, because we've broken out a lot of the updates that I typically do into unique individual presentations. So bear with me as we skip along through this. Okay, starting off, quick outline for you about what I'll be talking about. Of course, I'll start with service delivery standards, my typical update on that, talk about file statistics, things like that. I'll touch on marketplace monitoring as well. This is something we've been doing for about 3 years now, where we talk about what we're seeing in terms of compliance rate in the market, broken out by different product types. I'll touch a little bit on what's been going on through the past year, a little less than a year actually, as our last meeting was in January of 2020, as opposed to our normal fall meeting. So still a chunk of work has been done in that time though. And finally, I'll wrap up with a bit of what we heard during the January 2020 forum. And in a few spots, I'll I'll provide a bit of a response from the agency in terms of what we've been doing to meet those. So, service delivery standards. This is a graph that those of you who have attended the meeting are used to seeing over the years. Every year it gets a little bit longer. So essentially this is showing our permissions, applications for all types of permissions that come in with a linear regression just to show you that yes, the trend is going up over time. The little arrow that popped up there shows what our typical rate of receipt was when we developed our service delivery standards back in 2008. So you can see there's been a significant increase over the years in the number of applications we receive. We've partially addressed that increase through new efficiencies, changes in how we process things internally, better use of electronic systems. Well, we haven't obviously switched to a full electronic submissions platform as we're finally offering now with the new regs. We did a lot in the background to allow more sort of simultaneous processing of an application so that people from whether it's our biotech side or our toxicology side could work on things simultaneously and do a better job of sharing files. So a lot of work went into that, and it's really the only reason we've been able to fairly consistently meet our service delivery standards despite this increase. Now, all of what we've done in the background can't perform miracles. So as this work increases, we're starting to run out of efficiencies to find. But nonetheless, so far we're doing pretty well. Whoa, that's all the way to the end. Bear with me here. I won't hit that button again. Okay, so again, just a bit of a discussion here about what we're seeing. So over the years, there's a steady trend in market diversification. Over the last 10 years, we see about a 10% increase by year in the number of applications received. That's just pure numbers. So every year we receive more. And again, you saw that in the graph on the previous slide. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of increased complexity. We've been talking about this increase a lot since 2013, when we had the big change where oversight for efficacy was removed. So we started seeing a lot more complex submissions. We talk about this every year, and I probably haven't been the best at giving you concrete examples of this. So what we did do this year is we took a look back sort of over the course of about 10 years of applications, specifically on the biotech side, so that I could give you a little more of a concrete example of how things are changing. In terms of microbial species, so a microbial supplement that submits for registration, early on, we typically saw rhizobia species. It would typically be one species, perhaps two per product. So in 2010, we registered 7 unique new microbes. So there could be multiple products, but there were 7 new microbes that our microbiologists had to look at, do a safety review, et cetera. In 2018, that number was up to 29. In 2019, it was up over 40. So you're seeing a significant increase in not only the number of files, but in the complexity of them. We're seeing a lot of files, submissions, applications for registration, where there will be as many as 5 or even 10 actives. Each of those actives requires a fairly in-depth safety review. So you can understand that not only are their numbers increasing, but the level of work associated with each of those submissions is also increasing. And that's not just apparent in the microbial side. We see it on the tox side as well. So with chemicals, I just thought that microbial indicator was a good way to give you a sort of an idea of what we're seeing. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of expansion in the hydroponics sphere, especially boosted more recently with the legalization of cannabis products. But even before that, those of you in the industry will be aware that there's a significant growth in the greenhouse sector in terms of everything from vegetable production to cut flowers, et cetera. So it is a very large market area. The table at the bottom of this figure, you'll see that just basically over the years tells you the number of active files we had. And you'll note that this number is different from the previous slide. So the previous slide was the number of submissions received, and this is the number of active files that are undergoing review. So those of you who are familiar with our process know that it can take more than a year to go through the full registration process. So over time, you accumulate more files in the system than are submitted in a single year. So as you move left to right, you'll see our performance on delivering our reviews. And you'll see that 13, 14 to 16, 17 were the years where we had a backlog. Fortunately, we have addressed that, and we've been meeting service delivery standards since that time. So here I'll just do a little more in-depth dive into the different categories that we report on. So we break our submissions into new registrations. This is the first column there will be tiers 1 and 2. So these are the lower safety requirement tiers. New registration tier 3. So a much more complex safety review required. Minor and major amendments, so these are changes to a registration that has already been issued, but a company wants to make a change so that they can adjust formulation, change label, add crops, etc. Re-registration, self-explanatory. These are things that are coming back in to extend a registration period. Me Too registrations, again, these are typically selling an existing registration under a new label. And then the final column there is the overall. So you'll see over the years, it fairly clearly displays where we're missing and then the improvement over time. So there's the 90% target line. That's what our SDS is built around. So our SDS isn't built around delivering 100%. There's always some reasons why something might not meet service delivery standards, but we do target a 90% delivery. Moving along, the reason I drew a box around these categories is because they're really where innovation is being driven. So these are new products entering the marketplace as opposed to the other categories where it's minor tweaks or renewing existing registrations. So yes, these are the two key categories for innovation. And yes, for those of you who are paying close attention to the bars, you'll note that this year, for the new registrations in tier 3, we did have a bit of a hiccup. So we delivered about 65% as opposed to the 90% target. And the reason for this is that we had a bit of human error in tracking responses to a review process. So there aren't a lot of submissions that are in the new registration tier 3. So it's I guess you'd say the denominator is fairly small here. And we did have a group of responses that were submitted to the CFIA, but were not tracked accurately. So what happened was that we didn't actually find out that they'd been submitted until we reached out to inform the applicant that their files were going to be closed because they hadn't responded in time, which then brought them back to us with but we received a notice that you'd received them. So then we had to figure out exactly what had gone wrong. Now, we recognize that the issue here was internal within the agency. We missed receiving these, but my one note to everybody who's tuned in here is that whenever we do receive an application or a submission or a response, we immediately respond with a verification that your submission was received. So in this case, what had happened was the files were submitted through an older email address that should have forwarded to our current one. We had some kind of issue where that didn't work, and the applicant never received that auto response saying, hey, your application's received and has been entered in the queue. So it was our fault that something went wrong. But if you don't receive that message from us, please do reach out and contact us and say, hey, I submitted this, should have been received on date X. Why have I not received a verification? That way you can help us help you. That said, overall, we did exceed our 90% target this year. We delivered at 91%, last year, since this is always backwards looking. We delivered overall at 91%, but we are working to make sure that we don't have those kind of issues again. So outside of the actual service delivery standards, what are we doing to help improve service delivery standards? One of the main things is providing the best guidance possible so that applicants can submit a complete submission. So for those who've been attending over the last few years, you'll know that we developed the guide to submitting applications for registrations a few years back now. And each year we've been updating it and tweaking it along the way to improve it. Again, to anybody who is using this guide, if you find things that are unclear to you, please raise them to our attention, because that is the source of a lot of the improvements we make over the years, is feedback from you as the users. And again, people who are following this guide and use it actively, we find their submissions are much more complete, more thorough, and easier to review, which all shortens your time to market. In addition to that, there is a submission preparation training that is available on our external website. So you can surf to our site and walk through the PowerPoint presentation there. One new thing, as mentioned briefly by Linda, we have a My CFIA submissions platform, which is now available to those applying under the new regulations for new registrations and for research applications. We will be onboarding things like renewals and amendments to existing registrations as time goes on. But at this first stage, it's for new registrations and for research applications. So that's exciting news. I know it's been talked about for years through this forum, but it's finally here. One point, again, is that we're strictly adhering to submission requirements and closing applications that are incomplete. In the past, we used to keep these open with the idea that we were sort of working to help applicants submit more complete packages. But we found over time that this was taking up significant amount of our evaluators' time and preventing them from reviewing actual complete submissions. And people were using the submission process almost as a training process, where they'd submit an incomplete submission just to hear back from us on what was missing or what needed improvement. So we're now, over the past probably 3 years now, we've been fairly strictly adhering to our submission requirements so that we can accelerate our review times on those files that are complete. And the final note there that I've said in the past, files are processed in the order they're received. So the fewer files that are in the queue, the quicker everything goes. And if there are poor quality submissions ahead of yours, then they slow the whole system down, and they slow it down for everyone. So some ongoing challenges here. Incomplete submissions. Again, we're doing a good job of closing ones that are flat out incomplete. But we do see some sort of quality issues where if the applicant took a little more time to build their submission, we could review it more quickly and not require as many review phases. Again, here, the difference between 3 and 1 reviews is significant. So 245 working days for a really high quality submission versus possibly as many as 530 working days for submissions that are lower quality, where we're required to go back and forth with the company. We're also seeing frequent on hold requests and requests for extensions where applicants don't have all the information available to them, especially in cases where there's a third party involved or someone's using a proprietary formulation from somewhere else. So we ask that before you submit, make sure that the other people involved, so other companies, third parties, are aware of requirements and are ready to submit everything so that we don't see these hold requests. Again, another point is partially due to the length of the registration process. We've had applicants requesting to change formulation, sometimes significantly during the course of a review. We will not be allowing this because it frankly resets the safety review process. So if somebody needs to move forward with one of these changes or has made this change during the registration process, they'll be required to resubmit. One final new challenge that with the joy of having the new regulations finally published comes the challenge of having a 3-year implementation period where applicants can follow either the newer or old registrations for a given product. This means that we get to work under 2 different sets of regulations, which is a lot of work. So we're asking everyone, I'll reiterate what Linda said, encourage you to, as quickly as possible, transition to the new regulations. The new regulations were designed to accelerate access to market for safe products, and everything just gets easier for you under the new regulations. Labeling requirements are simpler, etc. So we strongly encourage people to move to the new regs, both to help you and to help us. Okay, so now I'll be moving on to the marketplace monitoring portion. This is a pretty quick one. But you'll see this is a snapshot of non-compliances we detected in the marketplace from April of 2019 through March of 2020. You'll see that by and large, the number of non-compliances is fairly low through the different categories. The highest source of non-compliance is the registration category, which is that dark blue bar. Again, these are typically products that require registration under the Act, but are found in the marketplace being unregistered, which is considered a fairly serious non-compliance. And this is most common in the supplement category. Other areas to note, you'll see across the field there, labeling infractions are fairly common. These can vary from fairly serious to fairly mild. And again, the better job you can do of developing a quality label, the better off everyone is. You'll see later on that over the years, we've been asked over and over again to provide better guidance for labeling. We've heard you, and so I'll touch on that a bit during my updates. One other thing I wanted to mention is that you'll see the compost category is one of those categories that it tends to get a lot of hits in different categories of noncompliance. I am happy to say that over the last year and moving forward, we've been working with Compost Canada, and so the non-compliances you're seeing here are largely because we've been targeting facilities that are not part of CCC. So these facilities aren't following the rigorous quality control and quality assurance processes. So we're able to focus our operational resources in areas where non-compliance is a little more common and bring compliance to that field. So final note here before I move away from marketplace monitoring, truthful and accurate representation is very important. Both is key to consumer protection, prevention of fraud, and also to make sure that products are marketed in a way that users have full information about the product and can use it safely. We've seen over the years that there's a bit of a tendency towards remove or requests to remove or hide active ingredients in order to avoid the requirement to register as a supplement. Again, this is strongly discouraged. Products that are supplements need to be represented as such, and the removal of claims or guarantees to avoid registration is not an appropriate corrective action. Moving on through updates. So this is a bit of what our year's been like. Obviously, the biggest one that we're all very excited about is that the modernized regulations were published on the 10th. You'll get a lengthy presentation on this from Ava later on today, so I won't touch on it at all beyond saying we're really excited to be able to deliver that. Part and parcel of that was a complete redraft of all industry guidance documents, plus internal, external training material. I think the number is something in excess of 40 different documents had to be updated and then uploaded to our website. So this took a lot of time and a lot of effort by the whole team. And just again, want to say thanks to the whole team for your contribution. This was a major endeavor, and I'm happy to say that everything is up and available on the website in time for the new regs. Again, the MyCFIA electronic platform, I mentioned this earlier. So new registrations and research applications are available now, with more to come in future waves. We also have done work in the past year on polymers, and Natalie will be talking about that shortly, and then hydroponic metals as well. And you can see Brett's presentation for that topic. Now I'll just cover a little bit of what we heard following normally I say last year's meeting, but in this case, it was the January meeting. So again, this is what we heard. So we kind of rolled up into buckets the various comments that were received. So regulatory modernization, the big obvious one that was a big source of discussion back in January. So the upcoming publication and the amended regulations, smooth and expeditious implementation. So there was a focus from you, not only on getting them published, but also providing all the required training, guidance, and making sure that you as the stakeholder really understand how your products are regulated under the new regulations and how you could bring things to market. So I'm happy to say that, as I just mentioned, a pile of work went into that. both in updating existing guidance material and in developing new stuff. So take a look at our website, work through things. If you have questions, by all means, submit comments to us. We're more than happy to see where people might be struggling and to address our messaging appropriately. Service delivery standards, this is always a topic of conversation. Overall, industry has expressed to us that they're too long. But one of the key things is that they're predictable, and at least by meeting service delivery standards, we're able to deliver on that aspect. And of course, everybody was looking forward to electronic submissions, as were we. One of the main areas of discussion, again, typically is revolved around labels. So the concept of electronic labels, sample labels, checklists, and additional training on how to label products. This is one area that I'm happy to say we took all of your comments and put a lot of work into addressing. So there's a new T memo on our website, T4-130, which is devoted entirely to labeling. And you'll be happy to hear includes sample labels as an appendix to the T memo. So you can go to the appendix and see samples of different product types, and then you can kind of model your labels after them. It probably won't cover every possible outcome, but it covers all of the key categories at least. And moving forward, we can always add more to this. Another common topic in the comments was marketplace monitoring. And the focus on a better focus on the border and at manufacturing sites as opposed to retail. We've taken those comments in hand and we are working to address them. Updating industry guidance, again, I've already largely discussed this. Transparency. So again, the idea to maintain open dialogue, engage industry and policy discussions, hands-on training. These were all sort of topics that fell under that transparency banner, and we're happy to continue working with both major industry associations, both Fertilizer Canada and the Fertilizer and Supplement Advisory Council. Going forward, we find it very helpful to be able to bounce drafts and ideas off both associations and get a good understanding of our stakeholder base. Another area of discussion were new technologies. So everything from biostimulants, bioactive compounds, biochemicals, nanomaterials, and even into gene modification and gene editing. We share your sort of interest in emerging technologies, and we continue to work within the section to make sure that we're abreast of what's going on and are ready to address new products as they come online. And finally, as you're aware, during the last meeting, we discussed forming industry working groups. So there were 3 primary groups or ideas that came out of that, both a hydroponic metal standards working group and a dual property products working group. Both of those working groups were formed and have made good progress. We also had a 3rd working group on the upper limits for exceedances of nitrogen and phosphorus guarantees. That one, as you can see, there is no check mark yet besides, but it's something that we have planned for our work plan going forward. We'll have to be addressing that one in the year to come. And that's it from me today. Thanks everyone for your time, and you can ask questions when we get to that question period at the end.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. We're going to move right on to Brett Tendler, who's going to speak to us about metal standards for fertilizers and supplements intended for use in hydroponics. Just a reminder to all the speakers to try and keep to your time limit. We're a little bit behind right now, but go ahead, Brett.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brett Tendler. I'm a toxicologist in the fertilizer safety section, and a lot of you may recognize me from last year when I was talking about the same topic. So I'll be providing an update on the metal standards for fertilizers and supplements intended for use in hydroponics. Okay. So I'll start my presentation with an outline where I will begin with a brief introduction to hydroponics. I'll move on to the CFIA mandate and regulatory authority, discuss the issue that is heavy metals in fertilizers and supplements intended for use in hydroponic systems, talk about how we at the CFIA are addressing this issue, including the discussions of the industry working group, or discussing the industry working group that was formed, discussing the working group's response to this issue, and finishing with the CFIA's path forward. So hydroponics in its simplest form is growing plants using soilless culture, which is simply just not using soil. So there are 2 main types of hydroponic culture. There's water culture and substrate culture. Water culture is when you grow the plants in direct contact with water, which has a diluted nutrient solution in it, which contains fertilizers and supplements. And substrate culture is when you grow the plants with their roots anchored in an inert non-soil substrate like rock wool, coconut coir, peat moss, and this has a nutrient solution added to it, which contains fertilizers and supplements. So
Brett, my apologies to interrupt. This is Natalie here. We're unfortunately not able to see your shared screen. Do you think you can try and share your presentation again?
Did it show up at all, or?
Now it is there. Thank you so much.
You didn't miss anything exciting as far as pictures. So yeah, so I guess for hydroponics, for both of these styles, it's basically just non-soil that has a nutrient solution that contains fertilizers and supplements. So hydroponics are already widely used in Canada, and their use is expanding quickly. So greenhouse vegetable production relies on hydroponics. And the three most commonly grown greenhouse crops are tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. And they are predominantly grown using hydroponics in the greenhouse setting. And they account for over 90% of the greenhouse vegetable production. Between 2013 and 2019, tomato production decreased by 4.6%, but cucumber production increased by 37.8%, and pepper production increased by 9.7%, with a combined increase of 11.1% over those years. And this led to a total production of 650,000 tons of greenhouse tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers that was valued at over $1.5 billion. On top of the production increases, the harvested area of greenhouse vegetables increased by 24.4% during this time frame, with a 17.61 million meters squared of harvested area in 2019. Hydroponics are also important to the cannabis production industry. With the legalization of cannabis in 2018, the production industry is rapidly expanding, and with it, the use of hydroponics. Monthly production of dried cannabis has increased from 41,600 kilograms at legalization to over 125,000 kilograms in June of this year. The cannabis cultivation area has increased from 450,000 square meters to 1.9 million square meters during the same time frame. And the sale of licensed cannabis totaled $2.188 billion in 2019 and is on track to surpass that number in 2020. So between greenhouse vegetables and cannabis production, hydroponics are involved in a multi-billion-dollar industry, and rapid growth in industries that rely on hydroponic cultivation systems is leading to an increase in the development and sale of fertilizers and supplements tailored to the needs of these markets. And some plants grown hydroponically are metal hyperaccumulators such as cannabis, and these plants can take up elements beyond their nutritional requirements, which can lead to contamination of the target crop with hazardous substances such as trace metals. So the CFIA mandate and regulatory authority comes from the Fertilizers Act and regulations, which state a person shall not manufacture, sell, import, or export any fertilizer or supplement that presents a risk of harm to humans, animal or plant health, or the environment when used as directed. And a fertilizer or supplement shall not contain a substance or mixture of substances that would leave a residue of a poisonous or harmful substance in tissues of a plant treated with the product. With that said, heavy metals can have negative effects on human, animal, plant, and environmental health, and exposure to metals can result in serious human health issues, such as organ damage, inflammation, irritation, and poisoning. In addition, metals like arsenic, cadmium, chromium-4, and nickel are classified as carcinogenic. So CFIA currently administers standards for 11 priority metals, and the 11 metals are listed here. These metal safety standards are based on a 45-year cumulative addition to soil, factoring in the concentration of metal in the product and its application rate over a 45-year period. Things to consider for applying soil-based standards to products intended for use in soil-free cultivation systems include the differences in chemistry, such as cation exchange capacity, metal speciation, and binding between soil and soilless media lead to differences in metal availability and uptake, and application methods and rates are different in hydroponics versus soil. So the CFIA began tackling this issue by conducting a literature review and hiring a toxicology student to research and better understand the differences between hydroponic cultivation systems and soil applications. The objective of the study was to assess applicability of current CFIA metal limits to hydroponic fertilizers and supplements. So the CFIA uses metal standards in evaluating product safety in support of registration and re-registration. And the CFIA field staff also uses these standards in assessing product compliance in the marketplace and as a basis for compliance enforcement action. As a result of the preliminary work, it was concluded soil-based metal standards are not appropriate for fertilizers and supplements intended for use in hydroponic cultivation systems, and the development of hydroponic specific standards is very complex and challenging due to the limited amounts of key scientific data, such as plant uptake variables and tissue accumulation potential. So from this, discussions around forming a working group for upper limits for heavy metals and hydroponic fertilizers began. And the industry, with members of Fertilizer and Supplement Advisory Committee, the Canadian Fertilizer Products Forum, and Fertilizers Canada, formed a working group to assist in the derivation of appropriate standards that are science-based, consider the inherent differences between soil and hydroponic systems, respectful of the CFIA mandate and regulatory responsibilities, feasible to implement, realistic, and factors in modern manufacturing processes. The working group comprised 25 stakeholders in addition to CFIA staff who participated primarily as observers. The working group had its first meeting October 14th of 2019 and met 5 times throughout the year. They discussed the issue, reviewed available scientific literature, volunteered industry data, and provided a recommendation to the CFIA in the spring of 2020. The working group conclusions and findings were: metal uptake in plants grown hydroponically does not come solely from fertilizers or supplements. Many factors such as growing media, type of system, and water quality are known to play a role in metal uptake. A causal connection between fertilizers and heavy metal concentrations in crops grown hydroponically is unclear. They reviewed hundreds of products volunteered from the members of the group, and they showed heavy metal concentrations are below detectable limits or at very low levels, and the products often use food-grade ingredients. The current heavy metal standards are based on cumulative effects of metal in soil, while hydroponics are not cumulative. And the current standards have higher limits, meaning they are less restrictive than the standards targeted by operators of hydroponic systems. So the working group recommendation was: there is no need for new metal standards specific to hydroponic fertilizers and supplements, and to apply the current fertilizer safety section metal standards for soil to hydroponic fertilizers and supplements. The fertilizer safety section has considered the recommendation of the working group, and we agree that serious contamination cases and safety concerns have not been reported in hydroponic fertilizers and supplements. Development of new standards specific to hydroponic fertilizers and supplements would be exceedingly difficult and time-consuming. The current soil metal standards can be adapted and modified to ensure their relevance and applicability to hydroponic cultivation systems. So the CFIA has developed a derivation of the soil metal standards akin to what is done for soil irrigation. So key points about this derivation: the current metal standards for soil cannot be directly applied to hydroponic products, as soil standards are based on the mass of metal per hectare, and product-specific application rates, which are typically in milliliters per liter or gram per liter for hydroponic products, must be converted to a per hectare unit for comparison to current soil standards. This application rate conversion will be similar to that as was done for irrigation. So our path forward from here is to publish an industry notice to inform regulated parties of the derivation of soil standards to hydroponic systems, update the metals calculator to reflect this derivation, and the metals calculator is available by email request from PASO, and update the T Memo T493 to include fertilizers and supplements intended for hydroponic use. Please put your questions in the Q&A box and they will be answered later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brett. A lot of information there. I'm sure we're going to get some questions, but good stuff. So we're going to move right on to Natalie. Natalie DeCan, who will be discussing regulations of products that are or contain polymers under the Fertilizer Act. Take it away, Natalie.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie DeCan. I'm a safety evaluator for the fertilizer program at the CFIA, and today I'll be speaking to you about polymers. So to outline the talk, and this is not responding. There we go, that works. So to outline the talk, I'll be starting the conversation regarding the regulatory requirements for products that are polymers or contain polymers, whether they're naturally derived or synthetic, when represented as fertilizers or supplements under the Fertilizers Act. I'll touch on where we're going with respect to registration, the safety data requirements, and a proposed phased-in implementation plan for products currently in the marketplace. And then I'll end with a reminder about the research authorizations for novel supplements. So let's start with a few definitions. So polymers are materials made of long repeating chains of molecules. These materials have unique properties depending on the type of molecules being bonded and how they're bonded together. So as per the Fertilizers Act, a supplement means any substance or mixture of substances other than a fertilizer that is manufactured, sold, or represented for use in the improvement of the physical condition of soils or to aid plant growth or crop yields. So the interpretation of the definition of a supplement was reviewed by the CFIA as part of the discussion regarding the registration of nitrification and urease inhibitors. It was determined that the scope of the definition extends beyond materials that directly affect plant growth, crop yield, or that directly amend the physical properties of the soil. And therefore, as an application of this revised interpretation, a polymer that directly or indirectly acts to improve the physical condition of soils or to aid plant growth or crop yield is itself considered a supplement. Polymers have a wide range of utility as supplements, for example, wetting agents or materials to control nutrient release, but importantly, they also have a range of uses or applications that would not be considered supplemental. So examples of this are seed flow coatings or formulation antifreezes that make no claims for improving physical condition of soils, aiding plant growth or crop yield. So these are not considered supplements themselves and are not regulated under the Fertilizers Act. So by meeting the definition of a supplement, the path forward we see is that products that are or contain supplemental polymers require registration under the Fertilizers Act prior to importation or sale in Canada. Now, under the amended regulations, mixtures are exempt from registration if, first of all, each ingredient is exempt from registration or is registered for the proposed use of the mixture. So an example of exempt materials, of course, is those included in the list of primary fertilizers and supplement materials. And second of all, the directions for use of the mixture must be consistent with those of the registered ingredients. So note that if those directions then are not consistent, or if the mixture contains a product that requires registration but is not registered, then the mixture itself does require registration. So products that are or contain supplemental polymers are regulated as supplements. As always, new products entering the Canadian marketplace require a safety review. So we ask that you now apply for registration rather than submitting safety review outside of the registration process. So to apply to register these supplements, please follow the guide, which is specifically designed to assist proponents in the preparation of a complete application. When preparing your label, please note that supplemental polymers are active ingredients and they must be guaranteed as a minimum percentage in the final product formulation by weight. The description of polymer for the guaranteed analysis must also be in agreement with the corresponding CAS listing, so please keep that in mind. These products do require full safety data assessment, which is also known as a level 3 safety assessment. So there are a few safety data requirements that I'll cover today, which are specific to polymer products. The details that must be provided regarding manufacturing or extraction process are a little bit more specific here. So for example, the relative proportions of monomers, cross-linkers, and catalysts that are used, and in the case where there are hazardous compounds present, the analytical results should be provided to demonstrate residual levels in the final product in cases where that's applicable. Toxicological hazard characterization must be provided for any of the materials used in or resulting from the manufacturing process. And if the polymer, any of its ingredients or degradation products are recognized or suspected to exhibit hazard criteria, and the hazard criteria are outlined in Appendix 4 of the guide, then an exposure assessment is also required. So additionally, if application to food or food crops is intended, a food safety assessment is also required. This means scientific rationale and/or data to address the risk of uptake and incorporation of any hazardous components into the edible portion of food crops. If food safety is not adequately substantiated, the statement "not for use on food crops" is then required to appear prominently on the marketplace label. So now let's talk about the proposed implementation plan. So new supplement products not yet in the marketplace that are polymers or contain a polymeric supplement, continue to require a safety review. We ask that you now apply for registration rather than submitting for a safety review outside of the registration process. So therefore, the only change now is that the label review is required as part of the registration process, and you have a registration in the end. So for all existing polymer products then, these are the ones currently in commerce in Canada after undergoing a safety assessment only, or a DS as it was formerly known, not registration. This implementation will be phased in. And so to start this discussion about this process, we have a proposed timeline, which is shared here on the next slide. So this is where we think we're going. So the proposed 2-year implementation timeline begins in January 2021. During the first year, proponents will submit applications to register their products under the Fertilizers Act. During this time, the CFIA will also issue information letters to companies that are found marketing products that are or contain polymers without registration. During the second year, which begins on January 1st, 2022, products not registered and for which no application for registration is currently under review will be deemed in contravention of the Act and may be subject to enforcement action. During this period, please note that the CFIA would not intend to take action against unregistered products found in the marketplace for which an application was submitted during year 1 and is actively under review by the CFIA. So finally, starting in January 2023, polymers and polymer-containing fertilizers and supplements that are still not registered would then be subject to routine marketplace monitoring and enforcement. So as a reminder here, research authorizations are issued for experimental purposes and must be obtained from the CFIA prior to the environmental release of any novel supplements. I'm raising this here because this includes any unregistered supplements that are polymers. So for more information on how to obtain a research authorization, please consult the Trade Memorandum 103. This is a complete guidance document for all things research authorization related. So with that, I'd really like to thank you for your time and attention as we delve into this discussion on polymers. If you have any questions, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box or contact us for more information. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Lots of information, and we got lots of questions. So if I could ask all the panelists to come back up, and we're going to go through some questions. We've bit a little bit into our question time, but maybe I can bite a little bit into the break. So here we go. I'm just going to ask the last one first because it's right on the top here. The question is from an anonymous person. On the guarantee of the polymer percent needed, is this needed in the submission or registration or required on the label?
So I can answer that. So you're speaking to the guaranteed analysis for the polymer. So if it's the polymer itself, the guaranteed, well, in any case, the guaranteed analysis of the polymer percentage is required on your registration form. So the fertilizer supplement registration application form. If you're coming in through My CFIA, you'll see that on the old form, we had all of the fields. Those are now populated right into My CFIA, so there's no form required. You just fill out the fields as they appear on My CFIA, and you'll include your polymer percentage there. You also need to, yes, please, include it in your guaranteed analysis on the label of the product.
All right, thank you, Natalie. So next question. Oh, we got a lot of them. We're not going to get to them all today, but I'll pick some. How are rhizobium for nodulation and mesochondria regulated at CFIA? How often are regulations updated? I'm not sure who that would be before. Maybe that sounds complicated. Maybe we can come back to that.
No, that's okay. I sort of quickly responded to the question in the chat line already. But Rhizobia and mycorrhizae still require registration under the Fertilizers Act and regulations, but they are considered to be relatively low risk. Therefore, they are subject to level 1 safety assessment. And therefore, however, there are no specific regulations pertaining to Rhizobia and mycorrhizae, and the new regulations have not introduced a significant change in how those two are regulated. I can't hear you, Jim.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now I can.
Well, okay, so thank you. And just as a reminder, I think some of the panelists may have been answering the questions, but we want to read some of them out so that everybody hears what the question is and the answer. So I may be going through a few that we've already covered, and I appreciate that, Eva. Okay, so another question. Who should we contact specifically to confirm receipt confirmation of submissions made in late September? That's probably Glenn.
Sorry, just to can you repeat that one? Sorry, I was reading through the questions.
Oh, I caught you.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
did.
So who should we contact specifically to confirm receipt confirmation of submissions made in late September?
The PASO office, so the pre-market application submission office. If I mean, their contact information is scattered on virtually every page of our website, so it's pretty easy to find, but they're the ones who receive and track submissions. So if you need an update to verify that something was received, then definitely contact them directly.
And Jim, if I can just add to that and
Sure.
maybe address some of the other questions that I've seen. We understand that there was kind of some mix-ups and some human errors, and you know, it took us a bit to adjust from home and ferrying of files from one location to another. So apologies for some of the lack of service that you kind of come to expect. In terms of not just time, but getting back to you in terms of emails and phone calls. We do recognize that sometimes things have fallen through the cracks, and we apologize. And if you're one of those people, please do contact the PASO office or us if it's kind of more technical in nature, and we'll sort it all out. But thank you for your patience as we lean our process in this new virtual world.
Thank you, Linda. Okay. Here's a quick one. What was the number of the memo to be updated for metal standards?
So T493 is the trade memoranda that contains all of our safety standards, and metals are in there. T493.
T493. All right. And I think this is the common question, so I'm going to repeat it again. Yes, all these presentations are going to be made available both in English and French. And I'm not entirely sure when, but we have Allison in the background running the show on this case. And these presentations are from CFIA. So there's a lot of people focused on making sure that they are available fairly quickly. So I can guarantee you that. Question from George. Can you tell us where biochar regulations are found?
So just to be clear, biochar is regulated as a supplement under the Fertilizers Act and regulations, but the new list of materials contains the definition and compositional criteria. So that's where you'd go to see whether or not your product or your material meets the definition, the biochar definition in Canada.
All right, thank you again, Glenn. This one from Daniel, it's a bit of a longer one. Can you elaborate on the supplement non-compliance issues? Are these due to nutrient overformulation? My experience is that some of these products have other ingredients in them. Anybody want to touch that one? Daniel goes on to say, other ingredients in them, such as kelp or lignosulfonate, which add micronutrients to the overall formulation and create an overformulation. Yet formulation processes have not changed from the perspective of label claim nutrient load.
Sorry, that was one of the ones that Eva had replied to, I believe.
Oh.
So in terms of from the high level, the supplement non-compliance issues are kind of across the board. If you see the slide, it's everything. The predominant one was the requirement for registration that was being missed. On top of that, as Eva indicates in her response, there's, depending on the issue at hand, it can be for non-compliance with pesticide residues, with heavy metal presence, with pathogen presence, or even as simple as issues with labeling compliance. So it's not an easy one to answer. It's not a whole, this category has this problem. It's very product specific.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Glenn. So I've switched to the open ones that haven't been answered. I have to do a random sampling here. This one's from Gassim. Do Me Too products under different brands need to apply for registration?
I think the Me Too is a registration process. So if you have the exact same product, and all you're really changing, and maybe Nat can jump in because I'm going to forget now, but essentially it's product name, brand, and I believe the
Color of the label.
Yeah, it's a very, very narrow set of changes that are permissible under this. Outside of that, then it trips into the, sort of falls into the new registration category. So yes, they are registrations. This is in order to bring a product to market, and typically it's used where, well, most often where a different company wants to market a product underneath their own label. So, but there's no change in directions for new use, no change in target crops, etc. It really is the exact same product, just branded under a different name.
All right, thanks, Glenn. I see a note in here from Allison, who's on the job, and she confirms that the recordings for the events here will be available at the end of November, and she's going to send out a link to everyone who registered. So we're focused on making sure people get the information. Okay, let's switch back to polymers from Eric. Is there a difference in the timeline for registration for existing polymer products and new polymer products? I think, Natalie?
Sure, absolutely. So the new polymer products are ones that are not yet on the market. They did not go through the safety DS stream, and they're not currently in commerce. Those ones, as of now and as of a while, they come in for registration. So those come right into the registration stream. So the implementation timeline, that is for the products that are on the marketplace. So the new ones, the only difference to the process, it's the same timeline, everything's the same, except that there's also a label review, and you get a registration in the end.
Maybe I can just add in as well for those who already have products on the market where their safety has already been reviewed. When you go through the registration process, that existing safety will carry forward. So it saves a lot of work in the registration process. So while the timeline, you fall into a category and you'll have the same theoretical timeline as everything else that's coming into that category in terms of whether it's a safety level 1, 2, 3. But your actual application will be processed much more quickly because we'll already have done the bulk of the work, which is that safety review. Essentially, what we'll be left looking at is making sure nothing has changed, and okay, does your label meet the new labeling requirements? So really, it is more of a label process as opposed to looking back at the safety, because that will already have been done.
All right, thank you, Natalie and Glenn.
Can I just add, sorry, Jim, can I just add in on that, just to, because this is kind of an policy interpretation of what constitutes a supplement. It's separate from the regulations, as you have noted from our anticipated timeline, and it is something that we do recognize that we want to talk with industry and make sure that we understand the implications, and that all of these kind of questions of what is included and what isn't included and who's got what kind of status in the marketplace. We do need to and do want to talk and work through Fertilizer Canada and FSAC to make sure that we have that conversation before we hit go in January, and make sure that we're on solid ground and that everybody's got things straight in their head before we push forward. So appreciate those questions, and definitely that conversation will continue until we're ready to hit go.
All right, thank you. I'd have to say that Natalie's going to get the trophy for the hot topic of the morning, at least. So for this one's from from Eric. For polymer coated fertilizers, if there are multiple grades of products that use the same polymer, but maybe have different release longevities based on coating weights, is registration required for each grade or a single registration for the polymer? So can one safety review of the polymer cover multiple subgrades of the nutrient?
So this is actually where that beautiful new mixtures exemption comes in handy. So if on your polymer registration, you cover urea this, or if it's, for example, if it's an exempt material and you want to include different grades of an exempt material, then include all of that on your polymer label that gets registered. Then when the time comes to have all your different mixtures that you want to then go to market with quickly, you use your registered polymer, which includes all of the intended uses, all of those different things you want to coat with that polymer, for example, include all of them on your label. Think big when you register. And then we'll look through all those safety, downstream, everything. We'll get that all covered in one registration. And then when you go to make those products, you'll be exempt because you'll have your registered polymer, which covers that end use. You'll have your exempt material or another registered material, and then you're free to use that mixture, legally sell and import in Canada.
Yeah. Eva will cover this in length later on today when she's talking about the new regulations. So if anybody is interested in this, tune in and pay particular attention when she addresses mixtures, because this is one of the really exciting things about the new regulations.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, folks, we're scheduled for a break, but we have a 10-minute break, but I'm going to bite into 5 minutes of that. So if you do need to take a break and I see you on the monitor and you're running, I understand what's going on. So I'm going to bite into 5 minutes to get a few more questions because, you know, this is really rapid fire. We're getting a lot of good stuff in here. So this one is from Shannon. Is there a new category of notification or minor amendment available? That probably is Glenn.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. So I know in the early, if you roll way back, years back, when we first started talking about how we'd address amendments, we introduced this discussion point of having notifications plus the minor plus major. So that notification category has disappeared. And essentially, again, Eva will talk about this at length later on this afternoon.
I will.
The regulations now, we're in the old regulations said that any change you made, you had to amend your registration. The new registrations, and I won't go into it in great length, but essentially say that there are certain things that you can't change without amending it, but if it's not identified in the list, then you can go ahead and change those. So there are a whole bunch of changes you can now make to a product without ever having to notify us or amend a registration. But Eva will talk about that later and tune into that part.
Well, you know what? By the end of all this, everybody stole my thunder, so I can just...
So take the afternoon off.
All right. Well, don't worry, Eva. We'll find lots of thunder for you. All right. Here's actually, it's more of a comment from Gary. Polymers meeting certain criteria are exempted from the requirements imposed under TSCA and REACH. See the polymer guidance. However, I'm going to answer this one and you guys can chime in. REACH is very aggressively looking at registering polymers. Polymers in Europe are considered an article like a plastic bag that contains the fertilizer, but they are going full tilt on formally registering polymers, and they're at the stage where they're categorizing the different polymer types according to the processes that they're going to use. And I wouldn't bet against something similar coming up in the US. Anyone else want to add to that?
I'll quickly add to that. In any case where another organization or a global organization of any kind has done safety reviews of the materials that you're looking to have registered, please include those in your safety rationale. Absolutely. Put them into the package, help build your case. We look into them ourselves, like independently, as we're going through these safety assessments, but if you include them already, even faster. So it's always welcomed.
All right, thank you, Natalie. A question from Mark. Will CFIA continue to work with PMRA to identify products that contain phosphates with site inspections of companies who submit IQs that ID phosphates in the formulation. A lot of acronyms in there.
Yeah, so this is likely coming out of the conversation that happened, I think maybe 2 sessions ago, where Pulse Canada raised the issue. We're actively talking with Pulse Canada and looking into this. It's an area that a few years back we published the updated trade memorandum on phosphate to clarify that these are not considered fertilizer materials in Canada. At the time, I think we saw it a little bit of a move away from them, but it looks like we have to get active in this area again. So we'll be working both with the PMRA, with industry, and even sort of outside of the fertilizer industry in terms of Pulse Canada with identifying products that are not compliant and taking action on them.
Just as a quick point of clarification, yes, we are absolutely going to be working with PMRA and Pulse Canada, but that is not with the view to reverse our stance on whether it's a fertilizer or not. Definitely both in the States, but also in Canada, you know, phosphates are recognized as control products, and they really don't have any fertilizing value themselves. So when it comes to compliance issues, like Glenn mentioned, is something that CFIA will be actively involved in, but that is not to say that we're going to consider phosphates a nutrient.
All right, I'm going to cherry pick one more question, and then we can have a bit of a break. This one's haven't I talked about? There's a lot of polymers in here. You're going to be busy, Natalie. You're now the official guru of polymers.
That's job security.
That's fine by me.
You know. Okay, where can I find this? So perhaps you spoke a little bit about this, Linda. Clyde is asking, can you provide more information on the path forward on consultations regarding the polymer policy?
And I think, yeah, I think he later on thanked me for that. I'd piped in without even before I saw his request, but just to reiterate that we recognize that this is a policy interpretation, and that we do want to talk about it over the coming months to make sure that we're all on the same page and ready to move forward, and that in fact we have identified everybody who needs to be coming in and where they are in status wise, and kind of reiterate some of these Q&As to make sure that there's broad understanding before we start implementing.
Thank you. That was a great wrap up to this session. Panelists, I want to thank you tremendously. A lot of information. This is going to generate a lot of discussion and a lot of further activity, which I think is basically what you were looking for, and certainly what industry was looking for in terms of a path forward and how we can get moving. So I personally want to thank you. I also want to thank Brendan, the WeStream guy, trying to keep us on track here behind the scenes, doing a great job. We're going to take a very quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back, and Suzanne Beatty is going to pick up in the second half, talking about, we've got a lot of good stuff coming up from Patrick Poof and Eva. This is your thunder coming up, Eva. It's coming, so get ready. All right, so 5-minute break. We'll just keep the link open, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We're going to begin the second section of the CFIA Day, and I'm going to invite Patrick Plouffe from Health Canada, who's going to speak about Health Canada's policy on foliar sprays in cannabis.
Hi there. Thank you, Suzanne. You can hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Great. Hello again. Yeah, my name is Patrick Plouffe. I'm from the Controlled Substances and Cannabis Branch, or as we like to call it, CSCP, at Health Canada. And I'm Supervisor of Regulatory Affairs within the Compliance Directorate. Premièrement, je voudrais remercier la CIA de nous avoir invités à participer aujourd'hui à votre forum. La loi sur le cannabis réglemente la production du cannabis, et le règlement sur le cannabis spécifie des exigences en particulier, par exemple, les bonnes pratiques de production qui sont applicables à la cultivation du cannabis. Et c'est clair qu'à l'intérieur de ça, les fertilisants sont des entrants importants. Et donc, ça me fait plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui pour représenter Santé Canada et ma direction générale. So the main purpose of my attendance today will be to cover, as Suzanne explained, the use of foliar sprays to apply fertilizers in the cannabis industry. And that's just to follow up with a short statement our branch released last summer, and which CFIA told us you may be interested to learn about as well. So that's going to be my main point that I will be covering. And you'll see, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. There's not all that much to cover, but I think it'll be beneficial. Similarly, je vais aussi aborder brièvement le sujet du compostage du cannabis, parce qu'on m'a aussi dit que c'est un sujet d'intérêt pour vous, ainsi que les exigences réglementaires qui sont applicables à cet effet. And finally, I'll do my best to answer questions that you may have or provide clarification. Now, I'm not an expert in everything, for sure. That's undeniable. And so if I'm not able to answer a question today, I'll take it back to the appropriate people within our branch, and we'll connect back with the CFIA and Fertilizer Canada so that you can have an answer. I'll be continuing mainly in English, but s'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas à poser votre question dans la langue de votre choix en utilisant la section Q&A dans la fenêtre de Zoom, comme mentionné précédemment. So for Q&A, don't hesitate to go in the language of your choice. So that being said, let's get right into it. For foliar sprays, last August, our branch released a message to our license holders to clarify if and how foliar sprays could be used to apply fertilizers during cannabis cultivation. And the reason for this message was that in 2017, under the previous access to cannabis for medical purposes regulation, there had been a policy decision made by the then Office of Medical Cannabis in regards of foliar spray. There had been some issue at the time, and a policy decision had been taken to prohibit foliar sprays on cannabis, unless it was a pesticide that was applied specifically and required to be used as a foliar spray, on cannabis. So our message this summer to our industry was that under the current Cannabis Act and its regulations, there's no specific or prohibition of applying fertilizers by foliar spray. So there's nothing that says you can't do that in our regulations. That being said, if a cultivator were to choose to do so, we wanted to highlight that there are some regulatory requirements that they are responsible for before going ahead and using a foliar spray. And so I'll quickly cover those requirements, and then that should conclude on the foliar sprays. So we have a section in our regulations that prohibits treating cannabis with a pest control product unless it's registered for that purpose, and that was part of the issue in 2017. So in fact, now we have a requirement that each lot of cannabis must be tested for pesticide residues before it is sold. And so we wanted our cultivators to be aware that if they apply a fertilizer by foliar spray or any other way as well, and that fertilizer contains residues of a pesticide, we could consider this that the plant had been treated with the pesticide, and there could be a non-compliance under our regulations, in addition potentially to the Pest Control Product Act. So we wanted them to be aware of that, despite whether they apply those fertilizers through a foliar spray or just normally. Similarly, we also have a requirement under our sections that is identical to the requirements under the Safe Food for Canadian regulations for agronomic input, which includes also fertilizers, meaning that fertilizers that are used by our cultivators must be properly kept and labeled within their facility. They must not use it in a way that presents a risk of contamination of the cannabis. And finally, they have to follow the manufacturer's instruction. So our expectations would be that if they want to apply those fertilizers through foliar sprays, they would be following the specifications that you would provide. It's also relevant to them that each lot has levels of chemical and microbial contaminants that it must meet. They must be tested, the lots, to show that it meets those specifications. And a little bit like discussed previously, if the fertilizer that they were to use, foliar spray or otherwise, were to contain contaminants, they need to make sure that their lots will not exceed those specifications, and which could potentially prevent their sale. So that includes things like microbial contaminants, but also heavy metals and other elemental contaminants. And finally, we have rather broad record-keeping requirements in our regulations. And so for applying a fertilizer, the license holder, the cultivator, is required to make a record when they do so, specify what was the substance used, what was the purpose, the dosage, and the date. So all that being said, what we wanted to do with that message this summer was to clarify that there's ways to use fertilizers as a foliar sprays to apply fertilizers in the cannabis industry. And the only thing that they need to be sure of is that when they do so, they need to follow the applicable regulations. And so that concludes it for foliar sprays. And then I'm quickly going to talk about composting and destruction, and that will lead us to the end of my little talk. So for composting and destruction, I've been made aware that composting is also something of interest to this panel. Our regulations does not prescribe set methods for destroying cannabis. We have a few requirements when destroying cannabis, but we no longer pre-approve destruction methods like we used to do under the ACMPR. The requirements that are applicable are that the destruction be done in accordance with applicable federal, provincial, and municipal environmental protection laws. That goes without saying. That the destruction method does not expose an individual to cannabis smoke or vapor, also for obvious purpose. And finally, that the destruction must be witnessed. So that is from a security standpoint. The destruction record has to be witnessed by, if I remember well, 2 people. Now, that being said, destruction can be on-site, but also off-site. And in the cases where it is off-site, we do require that an individual accompany the cannabis up to the destruction site, and that individual be a security-cleared employee of the cultivators or the processor, the case as applicable. So some of our license holders do composting on site, and they reuse their biomass throughout their cultivation in a way to find economies, whereas some others choose to destroy product through incineration solutions or landfills. Whatever the method of destruction being used, it's also relevant to point out that certain parts of the plants are not controlled the same way as others under the Cannabis Act. So we have 2 schedules in the Cannabis Act, Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, which says what is cannabis or considered cannabis, and then what isn't. And that Schedule 2 specifically mentions that non-viable seeds, mature plant stalks that don't have any branches, flowers, or leaves, and finally roots of the cannabis plants are not considered cannabis for the purpose of the regulations and the act. So that means that those parts of the plants can be destroyed, composted as any other biomass plant matter from our perspective. Obviously, there would be other federal, provincial, and municipal norms that would still apply, but from a Health Canada perspective, those are just any other plant. Then when it comes to flowers, leaves, and branches with those flowers and leaves, those are controlled and have the increased security requirements around them. So these are the 2 points I wanted to cover today. If there's time for questions, I can try to answer a few of them. And in the future, if you think that this is something that has been useful, please let us know, and let CFIA know what topics could be interesting to discuss, and it'll be our pleasure to participate again.
Thank you, Patrick. If you have questions, again, if you want to put them into either the chat or the Q&A, we'll pick them up. They'll be moved over to the Q&A. So if you do put them in, preferably in Q&A. I know there was a question and it disappeared on me, but I do recall it. And the question was, are there MRLs for cannabis?
Very good question. Currently, the PMRA, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, has not established any maximum residue limits for pesticide in cannabis. It's not something that will stay like this necessarily. The PMRA might decide to establish MRLs for certain pesticides in the future, but for the current moment, there isn't. That does not mean that any pesticide residue will cause a lot of cannabis to be needing to be destroyed or anything like that. There's an assessment that's done when that happens. There's pharmacopoeial limits as well in the literature, and we look at those as well, but there's right now no MRLs specifically.
So in preparation for that, Patrick, are there any residue methods that growers should be looking at or using?
Residue limits, you mean?
Yes, so residue methods, so analytical methods.
Oh, I see. So we have for our pesticide analysis, I guess, what makes more sense here, we have published a series of requirements. There's 96 active ingredients that needs to be tested for every lot. And then in our published material, there's the list of those 96, as well as a link with a method and the method specifications that the producers must meet, or the laboratories must meet when testing for pesticide residue. It links to a scientific article that the PMRA has published. So that's where the information can be acquired as well.
Okay, thank you. If anyone, again, a reminder, if anyone has any more questions, we'll give it another minute or so. If you want to type them into the Q&A.
Otherwise, I can also say anytime you have a question that pertains to cannabis, you can send it to us at cannabis@canada.ca, and we'll do our best to answer in a timely manner. And if you want to make sure that it reaches us, you can indicate that it's a compliance question and as applicable, and we'll be sure to answer them as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick.
My pleasure. If there's anything, again, don't hesitate. And it's been nice participating.
Thank you. And now, Eva, we'll give you the screen, and let's see what you can come up with for us.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. Good afternoon. As you know, my name is Eva Made. I'm the National Manager of the Fertilizer Safety Section. And as Linda alluded to, it is a great pleasure to be here today to bring you the exciting news about the Fertilizer Regulatory Modernization Initiative. After a long time in the works, basically since 2012, the amended regulations are now in force. First of all, again, echoing Linda's comments, I want to acknowledge and officially thank the Canadian Fertilizer Products Forum, the Fertilizer and Supplement Advisory Committee, and Fertilizer Canada for all the hard work, active engagement, and ongoing support for the initiative as it evolved over the years. Without your input, we wouldn't be here today. I also want to thank you for all your letters of support to finalize the amendments during the uncertain and challenging times of the COVID pandemic. The intent of the presentation today is to highlight key elements of regulatory changes, particularly the adjustments that were made between Canada Gazette Part 1 publication, which happened in December 2018, if you recall, and the final regulations that are currently in force. The course corrections were mostly made to address the concerns of the comments received by the industry. As our time is limited today, this presentation will focus on key changes between the old and the current regulations. Following this meeting, we will be offering subsequent seminars and webinars that cover changes in much more detail, and that will be split into multiple sessions, each focus on topics of greatest interest. At the end of this talk, there will be a brief polling session where you will have an opportunity to choose and vote on topics that, in your view, merit a further discussion. We also have a number of other venues in which that you can obtain additional information, but that I will cover later on in my okay. So coming back, finally, in terms of logistics, a big thank you goes to Fertilizer Canada and Fertilizer and Supplement Advisory Committee, who joined forces and so masterfully organized, managed, and delivered a very exciting and informative series of virtual meetings. Fertilizer Canada's moderators, Suzanne and Jim, have also kindly agreed to run the polling session at the end of this talk. Overall, you will have several venues through which you can ask questions. Obviously, this session is provided with simultaneous translation. And I'm told that it is the little globe at the very bottom of your screen that you have to press in order to hear the presentations in French. I will ask you kindly to wait with the questions until the end of the presentation. You also can redirect your inquiries to specific to amendments to the fertilizer regulations, to the fertilizer modernization email account, which was revived. And the topic specific webinars, of course, are going to be a great opportunity for you to explore areas and topics that are particularly relevant to your business and your interest. Finally, as Linda said, it was tremendous amount of work, but we were able to update all our reference and industry guidance materials. So all trade memoranda have been updated in anticipation of the amendments that were official or came into force October 26, as Linda said, and were published in Canada Gazette Part 2 on November 10th. We've also created some additional new trade memoranda. Glenn alluded to, for example, TIFA 130 on labeling that we felt could provide additional guidance and more clear information to regulated parties. So,
Eva, just to let you know, your slides are not advancing. Oh, there they are now. Okay.
Yeah, apparently my computer is very temperamental. So without going into specifics of the early stages of the regulatory development process, there were several key areas in the fertilizer regulations that were identified as deficient, too prescriptive, or in general outdated, which altogether added unnecessary burden on regulated parties and, maybe more importantly, were viewed as barrier to innovation and growth in the sector. Consequently, the review of the fertilizer regulations focused on updating product definitions and compositional criteria, clarifying general exemptions, revising the registration exemption scheme so that regulatory oversight is commensurate with the risk profile of the product, modernizing the labeling requirements, introducing mandatory bilingual labeling to ensure compliance with the Official Languages Act, and finally reducing the prescriptiveness and streamlining administrative requirements, which was critically important to prepare the road and the ground for electronic submission systems that Linda mentioned in her opening remarks, and also Glenn talked about, but we will hear from Wendy after this presentation as to how exactly this system is going to work. So starting with definitions, I believe for some reason this is not cooperating with me. Okay, some definitions were added, repealed, or amended to align with current science, industry trends, international norms, and to support the revised exemption scheme. Specifically, some terms were repealed as part of a house cleaning items, so brand, director, environment, fertilizer, mixed fertilizer, shipping bill, and supplement. These were either no longer used in the body of the text, or these definitions were already included in the Fertilizers Act, so it was unnecessary and duplicative to include them in the regulations as well. Also, the compendium of fertilizer use pesticide was repealed due to its limited utility. As you know, the registration of fertilizer pesticide combination products was intended on lawn and turf were canceled in January 2011. The only home and garden fertilizer pesticides still permissible are ones that contain a single ingredient with dual properties, such as corn gluten meal and ferrous sulfate. These pesticides must still be registered or approved under the Pest Control Products Act, so PMRA, and before they can be registered under the Fertilizers Act. Agricultural use fertilizer pesticide combinations are still permitted. Farm versus a specialty fertilizer. I do want to spend a little time on this topic. As you are aware, the term specialty fertilizer was repealed in the new regulations to support the modernized registration scheme and associated exemptions. The distinction between farm and specialty uses, so household plants, urban gardens, lawns, golf courses, or nurseries and greenhouses, had a historic precedent rooted in efficacy. It was believed that the economic impact in terms of performance was much higher in an agricultural setting than in a home and garden setting. Since this exemption was originally put forward eons ago, greenhouses, and we've heard about this a little bit from Brett, greenhouses have become major commercial operations, in addition with the regulations shifting away from quality and efficacy, so performance, towards safety. Distinction between farm and specialty was no longer really made sense. While we recognize the economies of scale, so the volume of products used, there are some important exposure scenarios that need to be considered. Home and garden products are much more likely to actually have direct impact on the user, the applicator, and the bystander than in the individual agricultural combinations. And that also particularly pertains to sensitive populations, immunocompromised individuals, and etc. Having said that, it is important to bear in mind that majority of what was considered specialty fertilizers will continue to exempt from registration and mandatory pre-market assessment as they fall under other exemptions. In terms of amended definitions, we have replaced lesser plant nutrients with secondary nutrients, still to mean calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. A fertilizer pesticide contain a new word is in the definition to account for single ingredient, multiple use or dual use products that are or contain a pesticide, and this applies to supplements as well. There were some rewording of the definition of grade to mean the amount of total nitrogen, available phosphoric acid, and soluble potash expressed in percent. Removing also the term partially humified from the definition of organic matter, and expanding it to include materials derived from all living organisms, not just plant and animal in origin. There are also some minor tweaks to the definition of a registrant. Now, the one thing that I want to turn your attention to is the definition of customer formula fertilizers, because that particular definition created confusion among the stakeholder community in the past, leading to some compliance issues. So, in Canada Gazette Part 2 publication, the definition of customer formula fertilizer was slightly amended. It still means a fertilizer prepared in accordance with the written formula that sets out the name, amount, and guaranteed analysis of each active ingredient and the signature of the person for whose use for fertilizing purposes it has been prepared. The difference here is the word active as opposed to inert ingredients. So if you recall, in the original text of Canada Gazette Part 1 publication, there was a highly complicated and elaborate text written around inert formula in order to capture additives, fertilizer and supplement additives. Well, that with the different interpretation of the definition of supplement that was put in place in the context of nutrification and urease inhibitors as requested by Fertilizer Canada, really allowed us to simplify the text. And this is where right now the regulations call for an addition of an active ingredient, which means an ingredient of a fertilizer or supplement to which its performance as a fertilizer or supplement is attributed. Now, the key element here that allows us to register nitrification and urease inhibitors and also requires us to register things like polymers, which obviously is a very hot topic, and Natalie was talking about that, is the broad interpretation to include materials that also indirectly impact the identity of the fertilizer or supplement, its and its performance. And the indirectly is the new element of the interpretation of a supplement. Next is obviously the list of primary fertilizer and supplement materials. The list of materials, for short, is a document incorporated by reference into the fertilizer regulations, and it replaces the old Schedule 2, which was a static list in the fertilizer regulations. This obviously is a great win for both the regulated parties and the CFIA, because the incorporation by reference, which is an authority derived from the Agricultural Products Act in 2015 allows us to add materials, change its or correct its compositional criteria as science, as more science comes to light, and remove materials without the lengthy regulatory change process. So it adds tremendous amount of flexibility in what products and what materials are exempt from registration. What is important to point out is that as the material assessment framework that was first developed during the technical review of Schedule 2, which a lot of you were part of as the CFP working group, still stands and still will have to be followed in order to make any changes to the list of materials in the future. And the key elements of that is that the information and data in support of a change has to be publicly available, number one, has to also pertain and be relative to the material as opposed to a final proprietary formulation or a commercial product. And has to include all relevant data with respect to safety and ongoing agronomic relevance of the material. All of those elements are still required in order to make any changes to the list of materials. We've also added a definition of a lot number that will add to the concept of traceability of the product through manufacture and distribution. As you know, the mechanism to trace back adverse health effects or outbreaks back to the fertilizer and the field in which it was applied is very challenging. But the lot number is something that is definitely going to assist in doing that. Micronutrients. Micronutrients is a new definition in the fertilizer, obviously not a new concept, but a new definition in the amended regulations, still identifying specific elements such as boron, chloride, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. As well as introducing the concept of micronutrient fertilizer, which is a fertilizer that contains or is that is represented to contain a micronutrient. So small nuance, obviously not a new concept, but something that we felt was important to highlight. Moving on to the general prohibitions and safety standards. These remained largely unchanged in the new regulations and just slightly repackaged, I guess, or rephrased. So the safety standards and the general prohibitions obviously preclude a fertilizer supplement to present any risk of harm to human, animal, plant health, or the environment. That remained unchanged. Also, what is important to point out is that we have replaced the term amount the commonly used amount, as it was largely confusing and arbitrary, and replaced it by an amount that is not in excess of the amount that is necessary to achieve its intended purpose. It may sound like a little bit more complicated text than the originally one proposed. However, it does bring more focus and emphasis on the importance of an application rate or appropriate application rate that is consistent with nutrient management plan and overall nutrient stewardship, which is a great preoccupation for federal, provincial counterparts, as well as industry. In a nutshell, though, safety standards in the fertilizer regulations remain to be outcome-based. And what that means is that the actual objective of the regulations, and that is no risk of harm, is prescribed in the text or in the body of the regulations, but the specific mechanism, limits, or thresholds how to achieve that objective are basically provided in administrative and policy guidance documents that gives both CFIA and the regulated parties the flexibility in how those safety standards are actually met. The other thing that I want to bring your attention and focus to is obviously the importance of environmental protection, environmental stewardship, including nutrient stewardship. And as you know, the regulations are very explicit in the text, indicating that major plant nutrients, secondary nutrients, or micronutrients in a fertilizer or supplement cannot be present at levels that are toxic to the environment. And again, it emphasizes the role and the regulatory responsibility the CFIA has along the nutrient management continuum. As you have heard me say repeatedly, this is a joint responsibility between federal, provincial partners, as well as industry. And we all play a significant role through that particular provision in climate change mitigation and adaptation. What remained unchanged is the prohibition on the use of proteins derived from specified risk material. This is still a residual kind of provision that pertains to health of animals regulations and the restrictions that are used on SRM in a variety of different products, include feed and fertilizer. Pesticides is still needs to meet the requirements and be compliant with the Pest Control Products Act in respect to the approved use and the application rate for that pesticide before it can be registered by the CFIA. Not advancing, is it? Okay, moving into exemptions from the Act and regulations. Similar to safety standards, these were largely maintained, but clarified in several key areas. So first of all, manures. They're sold in natural condition and conform to prescribed safety standards, will continue to be exempt from all provisions of the Act and regulations. Fertilizers and supplements that are imported or manufactured in Canada that are used for further processing or manufacturing are exempt. Please note here a word of caution that mixing, blending, repackaging, or application to seed do not constitute manufacturing or further treatment. And last but not least, expert certificate or expert certification. As you know, the CFIA, or more precisely the minister, were granted the authority under the Agricultural Growth Act in 2015 in order to issue export certificates to facilitate export and international trade of fertilizers and supplements. What is important to point out that export certification is not required or mandatory to export a fertilizer or supplement out of the country. It is a service provided by the CFIA free of charge currently. But at the same time, it has to be pointed out, and you have to bear in mind what the export certificate does and what it does not do. So Canadian export certificates only attest to the fact that the product met the Canadian regulatory condition, and they stay silent on the conditions of the importing country. That continues to reside within the responsibility of the exporter themselves. The Canadian export certificates also do not attest to labeling requirements that are in effect in the importing country, or product performance and efficacy, since the CFIA no longer regulates those aspects. Continuing with the exemption from the Act and regulations. So as you recall from the Canada Gazette Part 1 publication, the exemption for personal use for fertilizers imported into Canada was repealed. That is predominantly to level the playing field between domestic manufacturers and foreign importers. Now, what we have also realized following Canada Gazette Part 1 publication is that the personal use exemption was also used by product proponents to import fertilizers or unregistered fertilizers or manufacture unregistered fertilizers for experimental purposes. Now, some companies, as you know, still will opt to test the performance of a fertilizer under the Canadian agronomic conditions or agroclimatic conditions before applying for registration. So in order to allow and permit that kind of experimental research to be taking place in Canada, we wrote specific provisions into the final text of the regulations. So you can import or manufacture fertilizers intended for research purposes as long as the product does not contain a pesticide or a supplement. It is safe for humans, plants, animals, and the environment, and the residual product is disposed of at the end of the trial. Now, last one addition, which is important here, is that the crops grown with the fertilizer or supplement, well, predominantly fertilizer, sorry, are destroyed and do not enter the commercial food and feed chain. So this is going beyond just regulating the product itself, but also the plant material that was treated with it. Now moving to exemption from registration, which I understand is obviously going to be of tremendous interest to this group. So the amended regulations are divided with the exception with respect to the exemption scheme into a section devoted to fertilizers and the other devoted to supplements. So which fertilizers are exempt from registration? Fertilizers appearing on the list of primary fertilizer and supplement materials are exempt from registration the same way that the materials listed on the old Schedule 2 were exempt. There are two fundamental differences between the list of primary materials as it exists right now and the old Schedule 2. First of all, the list has been expanded from 56 to 106 materials so far, with obviously the possibility of expanding it further. And it is not a static list, which means that the CFIA, in consultation with the stakeholders, can make changes to the list from time to time, and as long as certain process criteria are properly met. But these do not require a regulatory change process, which is obviously very important. Now, two key elements to note here. A primary material on the list of materials must meet the term and the compositional criteria outlined in the list. So the structure of the list of materials is very similar to what Schedule 2 was. So in order to a material to be exempt from registration, it has to meet the compositional criteria prescribed on the list. And the other element is that products that are represented to contain a material from the list must in fact contain it. What else is exempt from registration? Customer formula fertilizers will continue to be exempt from registration. Mixed fertilizers that do not contain substances that are produced or derived from living organisms. This is specifically replacing the old terminology of minerally derived, mostly because it was considered very confusing and led to compliance issues in at the marketplace. Now, and this is something that is a very exciting addition to the exemption scheme, is mixtures. And I believe that both Natalie and Glenn mentioned that very quickly. But the amended regulations contain a whole new set of provisions that allow mixtures of fertilizers, supplements, or both that are either registered or exempt themselves to be exempt from registration. It gives tremendous amount of flexibility and realistically, and maybe more importantly, provide unimpeded access to fertilizer and supplement mixtures that are deemed to be of low or negligible risk. Just to recap, what is not exempt is fertilizer produced from living organisms, as well as fertilizers that contain a pesticide, an unregistered supplement, an unregistered micronutrient, or a registered supplement or micronutrient if the directions for use are not consistent with the approved ingredient or product use pattern. And this use pattern talks about application rate, frequency, method of application, or target crop. Now, changing gears slightly, coming back though for 1 second, because I think it is important, is here is that micronutrients that are, when sold either alone or in combination with major plant nutrients, so micronutrient and P and K blends, irrespective of the target market, and so whether it's home and garden or agriculture, require registration unless the micronutrient itself is already registered. So when we move our attention to exemptions for registrations for supplements, supplements and then seeds and growing media. Supplements very similar to fertilizers that appear on the list of materials are exempt from registration. Supplements that consist of mixture of supplements that are either exempt or registered themselves for that particular use are also exempt. So this exemption for mixtures is applicable to both fertilizers and supplements. What is important to highlight is that as part of the course correction, as we call it, or the changes that were made between Canada Gazette Part 1 publication and the final text of the regulations in Canada Gazette Part 2, is that the limitation on mixtures that contain one or more viable microorganisms as active ingredients, that limitation was removed. It originally stemmed from our concern over potential contamination that could be associated with further culturing, or manipulation of the mixture, as well as significant shifts in the microbial community as a result of sort of the prolonged manipulation. So we realized that as opposed to just limiting and requiring registration as a blanket for microbial mixtures, the regulatory text can effectively be nuanced to mitigate against those concerns and those risks. As with fertilizers, what is not exempt is materials that are not on the list, as well as supplements that contain a pesticide or an unregistered supplement if the registration of the original component does not have consistent use pattern approved on the label. So changing gears a little bit towards seeds and growing media that are treated with fertilizers, supplements, or a combination of both are exempt from registration as long as each component is either exempt from registration itself or is registered for that specific use. Again, use pattern on seed or in growing media. Please note that we are looking at a much broader definition of a growing medium to include not only potting soils, but liquid media, so liquid substrates, cocoa coir, food fibers, peat moss, vermiculite, clay, pumice, and perlite. So a lot broader scope than it was in the old regulations. Because before we delve into the labeling requirements, which obviously are a very hot topic as well, let's talk about registration requirements. So the registration requirements, or particularly the administrative portion of the requirements, have some fundamental and substantive changes that were introduced in the new regulations. So first of all, the extension of the registration period from 3 to 5 years, which was a very early addition to the amended regulations, even way before Canada Gazette 1 publication. And it was met with overall very strong support from the regulated parties and the stakeholder community. Obviously, it does represent a reduction in burden by reducing the frequency in which applicants have to approach the CFIA and obtain permission or approval. It is also streamlining administrative burden for CFIA by having fewer registration applications to deal with. Two elements have been repealed, which is the application form and the declaration of a resident Canadian agent, which were Schedule 3 and Schedule 4 in the regulations. Removing the forms had several purposes behind it and several rationale. The first one, obviously, was preparation for the electronic submission system, but also streamlining the administrative requirements. And as a side note, that actually leaves the fertilizer regulations as regulations with no active schedules at present. Conditions of registration, very similar to what they were in the past. Product must not be exempt from registration. So CFIA, to reiterate that, and that is not new, to reiterate, the CFIA does not have the authority to issue a registration to a product that is exempt from registration on request from an applicant. The product obviously cannot present a risk of harm to human, animal, plant health, or the environment, except pests, and appropriate documentation substantiating the safety of the product is required in order to obtain a registration under the Act. And last but not least, the label must meet the regulatory requirements. What I know that this particular group is going to be very happy about is that the mandatory inclusion of a copy, paper copy of a label, is no longer prescribed in the regulations, which means that text labels are permissible as part of the registration process until the very, very last stages to ensure that marketplace representations, logos, or any other label graphics do not contradict or mislead the user as to the final utility and use of the product. So, for example, you cannot have a picture of strawberries and tomatoes on a label of a product that is approved only for turf use. There are some new grounds to refuse an application for registration under the Fertilizers Act. So first of all, which is definitely by far more streamlined and logical approach, as opposed to having to register a product and then cancel it soon after. So the grounds for refusal is non-compliance with PCPA. So all fertilizer supplements and fertilizer pesticides and supplement pesticides must comply with the PCPA, the Pest Control Products Act. They also must comply with Health of Animals Act. And last but not least, obviously, they have to be compliant with the safety and labeling requirements of the fertilizer regulations themselves. With respect to cancellation of registration, the process remained pretty much untouched. And it is realistically the only section of the fertilizer regulations that remained quite prescriptive. So when it comes to conditions of cancellation for registration and the individual steps that the CFIA must employ in order to cancel a registration under the Fertilizers Act are pretty much the same. Labeling. So obviously, we are fully cognizant that this is there is a lot of information relating to the labeling requirements. Some are quite product specific. So in this presentation, I will predominantly focus on and talk about the general labeling requirements and principles, and obviously being cognizant of the fact that additional information is either available in written form in the new trade memorandum T4130, but also can be provided during topic-specific webinars that we talked about at the very beginning. Let's start with the definition of package. Package, and this is really the source of the terminology who packaged or caused it to be packaged, that appears everywhere with respect to labeling in the fertilizer regulation. So package includes a sack, bag, barrel, case, or any other container in which fertilizer or supplements are placed or packed, which also includes any trucks or vessels that are used to transport bulk products. So every person who packaged or causes to be packaged a fertilizer or supplements, or who imports the packaged product, must ensure that the package is labeled in accordance with the regulation. The information on the label has to be consistent with the information provided as part of the registration process. That is, if the product requires registration to begin with. The label must not have any incorrect or misleading information on symbol that would actually mislead the consumer or the purchaser as to the identity of the product as a fertilizer or supplement, its safety, or its safe use. Now, all the information required by the regulations are to appear on the label in both official languages. We recognize that the bilingual labeling is going to be one of the more challenging elements, new elements in the amended regulations, and probably most costly out of all the changes introduced. However, that particular change was necessary in order to ensure that the Fertilizers Act and regulations are compliant with the Official Languages Act. Now, the type of information that is required on labels of listed materials will depend on whether this is a single ingredient, in which case the term from the list needs to appear on the label, or mixtures. And for mixtures, the actual material, so the term, plus other active ingredients must either appear on the label or, and this is a very new and exciting addition to the fertilizers regulations, must be kept in records. Just as a side note, the record keeping option is not available to seeds or growing media. Before we jump into record review and keeping records, safety labeling. Safety labeling in the fertilizer regulations are also very much outcome-based. Therefore, any precautionary statements that are required on the label that are necessary to mitigate a risk of harm to human, plant, animal health, or the environment is what is prescribed in the regulation. However, the exact text of the precautionary statement is not something that appear in the regulations, which allows the regulated party and the CFIA at the same time to basically settle and negotiate the text that is most appropriate and most effective for a given product type, its ingredients, degradation products, or any other hazard that may be present that affects the user, bystander, or applicator of the product. What is important to highlight here, and this is not new. It has been sort of introduced as not as an addition but modification in the Canada Gazette Part 1 proposed text, is that any person, that purchaser, user, can request a document in English or in French that lists the ingredients that are contained in a fertilizer and supplement that present a risk of harm to any human or animal, unless the information appears on the label. That particular statement is provided in order to alleviate health concerns and mitigate against exposure scenarios to sensitive populations, immunocompromised individuals, or people that have very severe allergic reactions to the key allergens identified by Health Canada. So that particular provision allows us to keep the regulations in a very outcome-based fashion, but at the same time, there is the obligation to provide this information to the consumer to mitigate any adverse health reactions. Record keeping. Record keeping is a brand new authority that was granted to the CFIA as part of the Agricultural Growth Act in 2015. And that record keeping actually allowed us to move past and resolve some of the concerns that were raised in 2015, late 2015, by the home and garden sector that felt that labeling of mixtures with all individual products or ingredients that are themselves exempt or registered will not only take quite a chunk of label real estate, but also infringes on their proprietary formulation and confidential business information. In order to address these concerns, we've implemented and used the record keeping authority, giving it as an alternative or an option to mandatory labeling of exempt ingredients. So, two things to point out obviously here is a document, let's start with the definition, is defined in the Fertilizers Act as anything on which information that is capable of being understood by a person or read by a computer or any device is recorded or marked. That is quite important of a definition because it allows the records to be maintained and provided in electronic format as opposed to paper format only. Who needs to keep the record? The person who packaged the mixture or caused it to be packaged, or who imported it. And the records must be maintained in either official language, English or French, at the place of the person's location of business, or if they don't have one, at another location in Canada. What is important to emphasize here is that it is the obligation of the regulated party to inform the CFIA where exactly the records are located. What needs to appear in the record is pretty much the same information that would be required on a mixture, of a label of a mixture. And that includes registration numbers of all registered fertilizers and supplements in the mixture, the terms of exempt materials that appear as they appear on the list of materials, any other information that demonstrates that the product is exempt, and the last sentence being added between Canada Gazette Part 1 and Canada Gazette Part 2 is that the records need to include any other information that the person is in possession of that relates to product safety. Why? Well, that allows anybody that is designated under the Fertilizers Act, so our inspection staff, as well as all officers in the fertilizer safety section, to request information such as manufacturing method, quality assurance procedures, as well as a result of analysis, which is particularly relevant in the field in the context of an inspection of what the inspectors can and have authority to request. How long does the record need to be maintained? They have to be maintained for at least 5 years from the day the product was last imported, packaged, or sold. I do want to spend a little bit of time in guaranteed analysis section, and that is mostly because the guaranteed analysis section has changed significantly or substantively between Canada Gazette Part 1 and Canada Gazette Part 2 publication. And that is, in Canada Gazette Part 1, the proposal was to require in the guaranteed analysis the major nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, to be guaranteed on actual basis as opposed to minimal basis. That was not very well received by the stakeholder community. Actually, overwhelmingly, there was strong opposition to this part of requirement. The industry felt that it is very difficult to achieve in real life settings, that it does not align with the current manufacturing practices, and also runs contrary to the international standards and international regulatory bodies that all require major and secondary plant nutrients to be guaranteed on minimum basis. So we have considered these arguments, and and explored other regulatory tools available to us in order to alleviate the concerns. And the tool that we have decided to use, which also was suggested by the stakeholder community, was to use the safety provisions in the fertilizer regulations as a backstop to exceeding or excessive content, nutrient content in a fertilizer. So we reverted back to minimum for N, P, and K, and calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, as long as the content of these nutrients does not significantly exceed the guarantee. So we're talking about tolerances or implementing tolerances around the nutrient guarantee. So if something claims to contain 5% nitrogen and it contains 67% nitrogen, that is a completely different ballgame. Now, what is missing here, and this is something that CFIA will have to work with the industry associations and other interested stakeholders, is to develop these tolerances around the guarantee in a very similar way that it was done a few years ago for micronutrient products. So in a nutshell, major plant nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and calcium, magnesium, and sulfur can be guaranteed on a minimal basis. Micronutrients remain to have to be guaranteed on actual basis for each of the elements: boron, chlorine, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. And they are to be expressed in percent on an elemental basis. Products that contain organic matter still need to guarantee organic matter as percent, as well as the moisture content. Don't forget that there is a slight modification of the definition of organic matter, and the amount of any other active ingredient in percent. And as usual, the concentration of a pesticide that is expressed in accordance with the pest control products regulations. The one new addition that gave really added flexibility to the regulatory framework is for active ingredients that are present in the regulated product at trace or minimal concentrations, so less than 0.001%. In those cases, and we recognize them more and more as the active ingredients now vary in nature in commercial fertilizer and supplement products, those trace amounts can be very much biologically active and at the same time safe for plant, animal, human health, and the environment. So in those cases, the guaranteed analysis can, instead of a percent, use another unit of measure of the concentration, as long as it is expressed on per gram basis.
Eva,
Continue.
it's Eva.
Yes.
It's Suzanne. This is all really interesting, especially and so relevant because there's just so much in the new regulations for everyone to grapple with. But I just thought I'd give you a time check. We're about 15 minutes over. I know there are a few questions that you may want to get to as well. So just let you know.
Yes, no, Suzanne, thank you very much. I have 2 slides.
Oh, okay. Oh, excellent. Okay.
2 slides left, and I'm going to be fast. Well, not too fast so that you can actually hear what I'm saying. But okay, so guaranteed analysis for microbial supplements. It is, as it was before, the genus and the species of the microactive microorganism that needs to be guaranteed per gram, and specifically viable cells per gram. Now, in recognition of the fact that a number of active ingredients, either microbial or fungal in origin, are not really viable cells in the traditional definition of the word, we have we have permitted the concentration to be expressed in through other means. So, for example, whether it is spores, conidia, ascospores, basidiospores, even fungal fragments, those kind of measures of concentration per gram are also permissible. The new concept that is introduced by the regulations is microbial consortia. And you might be wondering why microbial consortia are not actually defined in the definition section of the regulations. It wasn't necessary because microbial consortia, or the concept, is introduced only once in the guaranteed analysis section, and it means a complex community of microorganisms that is taken from a single natural environment and whose composition is maintained without further manipulation. If you recall, the further manipulation is really intended to mitigate risks against potential contamination that is introduced into the product, as well as population shifts, either due to mutation, evolution, or any other changes in the microbial profile. I am going to skip the pH adjusters and acidifiers. The guaranteed analysis is pretty much the same. One note of caution is a lot of these materials have been added to the list of materials and therefore are exempt from registration, but the generic exemption has actually been removed. Implementation and transitional provisions, very quickly on that part. As you know, the new regulations contain a specific provision and that allows companies to comply and follow the old or the new regulations for a period of 3 years. You cannot pick and choose individual provisions per product line. So you cannot opt to use the new exemption scheme and the extended registration period while not conforming to the bilingual labeling requirement. So you must adopt all for a given product, which is all in none kind of response. And once you make a change, you cannot go back and forth between the old and the new regulations. Now, operating under two regulatory regimes is obviously a huge challenge. It is a challenge for regulated parties that will have to make a decision which basically regulatory framework to follow. And that decision has both pros and cons. We obviously encourage and recommend that you opt to use the new fertilizer regulations as soon as possible. However, you have to fully understand the consequences as well. As such, we really, really strongly recommend that you familiarize yourself with all the information that is currently available online. That we did spend a significant amount of time and effort to make sure that it is as exhaustive as it possibly can before you start asking questions. So make sure that your choice is an informed choice. And obviously, we're going to be here to support you whenever we can. With respect to service delivery standards, I am going to spend 2 seconds on the subject because I know that there are going to be questions coming up regarding that. The service delivery standards per se are not changing between the old and the new regulations. Obviously, there are a lot of ins and outs between the old and the new regulatory system. Additional exemptions, the expanded list of materials, the extended registration period, all of those things should also contribute to a decrease in the inflow or intake of applications for registration. However, the flip side is also true, where we will be requiring registrations for some product categories that are currently exempt. However, having said all that, between the new regulations and the electronic submission system, we believe that there are going to be some significant improvements and efficiencies made to the system, and we will monitor the service delivery standards very closely, and if at all possible, or they are going to be revised to reduce time to market. The other element that I want to mention is that, as you can imagine, the transitional period is going to be very challenging for the inspectors. So our folks in the field and on the ground are going to really experience a lot of challenges as to how to administer the new regulations and the former regulations. We do kindly ask that you don't approach your local office or your inspectors to conduct the label review just in case. They have a big job to do. We are all working under reduced capacity and challenges associated with the ongoing pandemic. So outside of an inspection, we really encourage you not to ask CFIA inspectors to just test out the system and see if your label passes or not. So what more information? There are some very generic high-level pieces that are available to you, including the notice to industry, the listserv, social media post. We have also recorded this presentation. We are still trying to figure out logistically how to get that to you. It's available and recorded in both official languages. As I said, following the Slido polling, we will be designing subsequent webinar series to assist you in guiding through the new regulatory system. And so please do participate in the Slido polling. And also available are all of the trade memoranda plus new trade memoranda. You're going to see that they are designed to be as user-friendly as possible. When you land on a link to a trade memorandum, it will give you a possibility to access the old or the new memorandum at the same time. Also, the fertilizer modernization account has been revived, and when you have product-specific questions, obviously the inquiry process through PASO is still available to you. I am very sorry for going over the time, but I kind of warn you that that may happen. And I thank you very, very much for your attention. We'll be happy to answer any questions and either right now or the ones that are written.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Eva. Appreciate that, just so much information, those new regulations. It's pretty hard as a regulatory person to contain yourself. I can appreciate that. I'm going to take a couple questions here and just a general comment because did have some people ask. The Q&As, if you're interested in those, please send a request to Allison and she will send a copy to you. And we'll also, as far as the unanswered questions, we'll be sending those to CFIA and getting responses to those as well, so that those will be available if anyone wants to see the responses to questions that we don't get. I'm going to ask a couple questions here, and Eva, and then we'll move on to Wendy. And if we have a bit of time at the end, we can always go back. The first one I'm going to ask here is, so if our company manufactures a technical active ingredient, aquatic plant extract, that is sold only to other companies that reformulate or blend this extract with other ingredients to produce a final product that they place on the Canadian market, is my company required to register this as a supplement? Or does the burden fall only on the company making the formulation to register their final product?
If I understand the question correctly, if there is no importation on sale involved with the extract itself, the final formulation is some. I mean, there is always an option to register that particular active or to register that extract. But if it is an unregistered ingredient that is then blended in another product, the blended product requires registration. So there are two, like I said, so there are two options. The mixture is only exempt if the elements are already registered or exempt themselves.
We've got a quick question here as well for Natalie or yourself, Eva. If the polymer registration, I think this refers to the slide that Natalie showed with the timelines for the polymer registrations and the transition. If the polymer registration is to be consulted with industry and not enforced, why are current polymer coated fertilizer safety assessments in the queue being changed to registrations?
This is the implementation and the discussion that Linda was referring to and Natalie was referring to is talking about products that are in the marketplace already. So, so what we are saying is that right now, if somebody asks us a question whether something requires registration or not, the answer is yes. But in order to allow people to transition into the requirement as opposed to stop selling right now, we have that implementation thing, but that is designed for products that are already in commerce. Natalie, feel free to jump in.
You're right on the button there, Eva. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. And just one last question before we move on to Wendy. When you say actual amount of micronutrients must be guaranteed, are you talking about what the theoretical calculation by a company's chemist comes up with based on the formulation? Or are you talking about lab analysis results? I ask because we see lab results at those low levels are not consistent. What is the definition of your actual?
So actually, since I'm here, Eva, do you mind if I answer this one? So for micronutrients, you need to be able to meet your micronutrient upper tolerances, and absolutely the true identity of the product should be reflected in your guaranteed analysis. So it's very important that what you include in your guaranteed analysis is actually what's in the product, what's actually being shown in your results coming from the lab. So the theoretical calculation, if it's very low, may not be the true presence of your micronutrient in that product. So please use your results of analysis. If you are so low that you're unable to detect those micronutrients, then we have another discussion. Maybe those micronutrients aren't being intentionally added. Maybe they're coming in as part of a different ingredient kind of a thing. So we can have a different discussion there. But to answer your core question, the true representation of that product needs to be what's in your guaranteed analysis.
And that's the distinction between major and secondary nutrients and micronutrients. Micronutrients always have to be guaranteed on actual basis. And meanwhile, the NP, NK, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur were guaranteed a minimum. We tried to go to actual. That did not work very well. So we reverted back to minimum, but the micronutrient situation has not changed from the old regs to the new regs.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Eva. I'm sure, as I said, that there are a number of questions that we'll be passing on to CFIA, and we'll provide some clarification for the participants following the webinar. Now, for our final speaker, Wendy German from CFIA will discuss electronic submission platforms with the My CFIA portal and enrollment, e-submissions, and online payment options.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? And then my next question is, how much time do I have? Because I know that we're over time.
Just to, so it's 1:56 I have here, so you have 1 minute. And
okay,
no, it's 1:56 right now, so we're about 30 minutes behind right now. And you had a 30 minutes, so if you could do it in 20 minutes, we can maybe try to speed up maybe the Slido polling as well later on.
Okay, well, I will try to speed up and skip over some things. Thank you for having me today. I am Wendy German. I am from the National Service Center of the CFIA, formerly known as the Center of Administration. And our agents are the ones that you hear when you call our general 1-800 number to get through. We also manage your account when you are using My CFIA to request our services online. Je suis également bilingue, alors n'hésitez pas de demander des questions dans la langue de votre choix. So, everyone can see the screen? I'm not hearing anything bad about that.
Showing up, Wendy.
Pardon?
I said, yes, it's coming in nice and clearly.
Great. So I think you all know why we're going digital. It's to modernize. The agency's going through this big change to a digital rollout. We want to make sure that you have access to online services, which we've learned obviously in this pandemic and working from home makes things much more smooth. Main reasons you should be using My CFIA: it's convenient, it's secure, you can request your authorizations through it, you'll be able to manage and track your service requests, you can pay for it online, and you can cut back on paperwork by uploading your documents digitally. So today I'm mostly going to talk about how to enroll in My CFIA, because I think we all know which service you all want to get. It's your registration for fertilizers or supplements, or the research authorization. Those are the only two pre-market application submission office related service requests that are currently available, although more are coming. I'm just not in charge of those ones. I think we already know which permission you need. It's the pre-market ones. So I'm here to talk about enrollment. Enrollment is basically how to create an account in My CFIA. And we're going to use lots of terminology here that is specific to the system, but I'll try and break it down for you. First, you need to create a contact profile. So that's for you yourself. So that's your, who are you who wants to come in and use the system? That is your contact profile. Versus a party profile, which is created for your business. So everyone needs to come in and create a contact profile. It's your very first part of saying, yes, I'm real, here's my email address, I exist, and then you can create your business profile. And then there's also other profiles for other users, such as our veterinarians, and for alternate service providers, such as laboratories. But I'm thinking most of you, since you are representing a business, you will be creating a party profile, which I will explain. So to enroll, you will need to have a couple of things ready, and I'll go through the checklist later on. But there's two things you need to have. Basically, we need a proof of business and a proof of authority. The proof of authority is basically telling us that you are authorized to work on behalf of your company. Because this is digital and it's not the same as showing up in person, we need some sort of assurance that you do represent the company that you are signing up for. So we need, we have a form to fill out that basically is an attestation. I will show you what that form looks like. And it basically gets someone in your company who is in charge, likely you know, a CEO, a CFO, someone from your board of directors, or if you are owner operated, it could be yourself, to designate yourself as the profile authority. That means you are responsible, you are the head honcho for the entire profile. And you can designate someone as your profile manager, which basically says, I'm the head honcho, I don't want to do the work in My CFIA, someone else can do that for me, you make that person your profile manager. Now it can be one and the same if you, again, are owner operated and that's how you like to run your business. Enrolling can take about 30 to 60 minutes depending on how complex your business is. but I'm here to tell you a few things that'll hopefully make the process much smoother. So I talked about the proof of authority. The other part is proof of business. And the easiest way to give us a proof of business is your Government of Canada business number that you would have had from the Canada Revenue Agency. If you do not have that number, that's fine. We're just going to ask for another piece of identification, maybe like an article of incorporation, or another official document that has the official legal name of your company. Why legal name? Because that is linked to your compliance records, because we always want to link the regulations back to an actual legal entity. So it's not you personally, it's the company who's asking for the services from my CFIA. This chart tells you the different accountabilities. So as I was saying, the company officer is someone like your CFO, your VP, your board of director member, but they're going to sign off on saying, yes, this other person is my profile authority. And they're going to be the head honcho when it comes to all the things that are happening in my CFIA. It can be the same person as the profile manager. That's basically the person who's going to manage the account. In addition to the profile manager, we also have an alternate profile manager. So if you want to share the role with somebody else, or you know you're going on vacation, you can designate someone else as your alternate. And last but not least, we do have the party contact, which is basically your employees. And you can add your employees to the profile after the fact, after you've enrolled, to say, yes, these are people who work for the company and will be doing activities in my CFIA. The only difference is party contacts, meaning your employees, won't be able to touch the profile information, because that's the base information about who you are in the system. And so you don't want your employees maybe running around and deleting other people. But they can submit service requests on your behalf. So once you're all signed up and you say, man, I don't want to deal with this anymore, you have become invited, and it can be someone on your team who submits the service requests on your behalf. So now you need to determine your business model, and there's lots of flexibility, and I realize there's lots of text on screen. So I'll break it down like this. You can have multiple profiles, or you can have a single profile, meaning you can have one account or several accounts. It all depends on how you want to run your business. And we actually have some videos on our website, which are very useful. They are geared towards a fictional pasta sauce company. However, the general concepts are applicable to anyone. The best example I have is this. If you have one part of your company that is involved in domestic production, and then you have another part of your company that maybe is involved in exports, and those two different, are branches of your company do not really work together, but you're all under the same legal name, you might want to choose to have a multiple party model. So that means you sign up with two different accounts, and you can have the same profile manager for both of them, or you can have different profile managers for both of them. It's really all up to you. But you're always linked back to that legal name, which is why we need to first verify the proof of authority that, yes, the people who have made this account are authorized to do so on behalf of the company, and your proof of business, which means, yes, you are a legitimate Canadian business requesting services from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. I feel like I'm talking very quickly, but we're going to proceed. Here's here's just an example about a greenhouse operator. So he might have 3 physical establishments across the country, but he wants to have one single party profile. So he can add all the different locations for those establishments, but he still has only one My CFIA account. He has his employees, and they all request services from the CFIA through that one account. So that's a single party model. And then in the multiple party model, we have a different greenhouse owner, Amy, and she wants to import plants, but she wants each location to do so independently and not see what the the other accounts are doing, right? So maybe there's one in BC and there's one in Ontario and there's another one in Newfoundland. She would like each of the employees in those locations to submit the service requests themselves. So she can create different party profiles and different profile managers for each of those locations, and then they can add the employees. So it's a bit more independent. However, Amy is still listed as the profile authority, which means she can still see everything. She's the head honcho. So here's the main thing we want to let you know. Have your stuff ready before you are ready to enroll. And so let me just browse away very quickly to show you the proof of authority form, because it's very simple. It's basically an attestation document. And I'm just going to use this new fun thing called New Share on Zoom. Share this one. Here we go. So the proof of authority for business use, this is a PDF that you will download. Please try to use Internet Explorer. It doesn't always work in Chrome or Firefox. My apologies. And basically you get the owner, director, or partner of the business to attest that they are actually the person with the legal business name. And they attest it, it goes in here. And they basically say, I authorize so-and-so to be my profile authority. Great. And the first part of the form basically just says put in the information and it will populate it for you. Right now, you do need to sign this with a wet signature. We are working on digitizing this, but we would like the signature of the overall business, the company authority, the owner, director, VP, so-and-so, to sign off on it. And then you'll be uploading this document as part of your enrollment process. We are working on making this completely digital, just so you are aware. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay, hopefully we are back on the presentation. If I'm not, someone will let me know. So I'm trying to keep this short. I just want you to know that there is a lot of information online. We have user guidance. Everything I'm going through in this presentation is available on the website under our user guidance for MyCFIA. Many roads on our website lead to the MyCFIA user guidance, so I do encourage you to go look at it. Once you've signed up as a contact profile, you'll be presented with your sign up to, you want to enroll a new party, alternate service provider, or enter an invite code. You actually want to enroll a new party. That's how you're going to start a new account for your business. So this is an example of the information that is included in the dashboard for a business. So it's, what's your name, the business structure, your legal name. Again, we'd like this to match the official business number that you will provide, an office phone number, and then general address information. Your supporting documents, such as that proof of authority form that you uploaded, will also appear here. Once you have your account, this is what it will look like. And these are some of the options where you can add additional information to your account. One I would like to bring your attention to is here, there's an on-account number. So if some of you already have one of the payment remittance accounts with our National Accounts Receivable Center, you can put in your account number so that you can choose that as your default of payment for anything that you need to pay for. Also on your dashboard, you'll be going down to the new service requests. And one of the drop downs you can get is for the registration, the pre-market application submission office service requests. Oop, I've gone too quickly. So that's the one that you're going to choose. So I do want to mention that what we do on our side, our team, we're going to validate your information. And you can't submit a service request completely until you have a validated profile. So you can start an application, however, it will not be fully submitted to the PASO team until you have a validated profile, which means, yes, we've checked your business number, and yes, we've checked your proof of authority. So you can go ahead and try the new online submission process, but it will remain in draft until you're validated. And if we do need to reach out to you, you will likely get an email from us, and then with some information about what we need from you. And then you can call us at our 1-800 number or email back, and we will help you finalize the enrollment process. So give me 1 second to just pull up some final things, because I've lost my sharing. Okay, that's good. All right, so this is the My CFIA landing page where you can go and sign up. And this is where all of our guidance resides. So when you sign in, when you first start as a contact profile, it's going to ask you to choose a secure sign-in method. And then the 2 options are using your banking information or creating a GC key. And this is going to be for your contact profile. So not yet your business, but your contact profile. The same way that the CRA went online, so you could file your taxes online, and they worked out some sign-in partners. It's really just using their encryption. We don't see it. It's all behind the scenes. Or you can get a GC key, which is the Government of Canada's standard for an encryption key, so that you know that the information you are providing to the CFIA will be secure in this. It'll ask you to create a username and a password, and then you'll have that GC key to continue. Then you'll sign up as a contact profile, which is just you, so it'd be just me, Wendy, signing up. And then once you have that, you can create one for your business and add all the information you need. We will, once you've uploaded everything, we will make sure that you are validated, and then you are good to go and start with a new service request. So last but not least, I thought you might want a sneak peek at what the actual PASO screens look like for the new fertilizer or supplement registrations. This will be posted on the CFIA website under the My CFIA user guidance, which is, I can find it. Nope. Sorry, I'm losing all my tabs. Oh, I can move that. There, does everyone see My CFIA user guidance?
Yes.
Great. So it will be here under requesting services. It's we've just had a bit of a delay in the web posting, so it hasn't happened yet, but I can show you the screenshots, which I will now do with a new share through Zoom. Thank you, Zoom. Hold on, I'm not finding it. There it is. Okay, so once you've logged into your My CFIA account, I'm just going to go back up. And you've selected your company. Make sure that you select your company, otherwise you will be going as the contact profile and as in an individual, and that's not what you want to do. You want to make sure that you press select when you're in your party administration to say, yes, it's not me, Wendy, the individual, it is me, Wendy, who is authorized to do this under NutriFood. And if you can see here, it says validated party. So that means that we've done our checks, we've verified that you are who you say you are, and that you're doing business on behalf of that business. When you select new service requests, you'll be able to choose the one for the PASO application. And then you'll be able to do the ones for the registering a fertilizer or supplement product or applying for a research authorization. Registering for a fertilizer or supplement product is completely digitized, which means instead of filling out a paper form or a PDF form, you will just be entering all the data directly onto the screen. Whereas for the research authorization, you will still need to download a PDF, fill that out, and then upload that PDF. The good news is you don't have to mail anything. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I want to admit I am not a fertilizer specialist. I work in the service center. But the basics are, it's incredibly straightforward and that there is guidance on almost every single screen. So you'll see here that there is a link to the PASO online guidance. If ever you're stuck, you just click that and it will bring you back to our website. So give your application a name. If you're going to be submitting multiple, you want to give it a memorable name and possibly the year and date of submission. Just because they are going to all show up on your CFIA dashboard. And if you're someone who submits a lot of them, it can be a very long list. You can filter though. I'm going to skip the privacy statement. I will let you read that. It asks you to have an authorized representative, and it will only bring up people that you have already added as contacts. So if you are the only employee who is associated with this CFIA profile, your only option will be yourself as the authorized representative. So I encourage you to go look at our guidance on how to add your employees, that is your other profiles to it, so that you can choose other employees here. It asks you to identify a Canadian agent. Again, not being a fertilizer specialist, I'm not sure what that means, but I'm sure it means something to you. And then it actually gets to the registration application where you will select what it is, you'll give your brand name, French and English, the product name, and the grade. Now you'll see here, I just want to point out one thing. Sometimes you will not be able to proceed to the next step until you have uploaded a document. So in some steps, uploading a document is required, and in other steps, it is not. But there will be open text fields for you to submit information. In this one, you can proceed without uploading your document. And this is what the document upload looks like. Please note, it needs to be a PDF, JPEG, or a PNG file. So it cannot be Word, it cannot be Excel, and it needs to be under 5 megabytes. I understand from some of the colleagues who review these submissions that they can be very lengthy. So be sure to break your documents up into 5 megabytes or less. And you can do multiple uploads, right? So it's going to be upload it, save it, come back, upload another one. So the next part is some more details about the product, and then a very long list of all the NKP and other things. I know I'm going quickly, but remember this will be posted on our CFIA user guidance, so you will be able to see these screens again. And then it will ask you that you do have to provide information on your proposed safety risk assessment. And this is one of those places where you will need to upload a document. It's grayed out for the next step. So you cannot continue until you've uploaded that document or supporting documents. Now, I would like to warn you, if ever you need to step away or go find those documents, maybe scan them in, please remember to save and return later, because if you cancel, you will lose all the information you have put in to date. Your application will be waiting for you in draft back on your CFIA dashboard. Please remember to save and return later. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview. Those are the main points I wanted to hit regarding this application. And just a final reminder that we need to make sure that you are validated before your submission will actually be sent over in the digital queue to the reviewers. So in your dashboard, which I thought I had a picture of that. In your CFIA dashboard, which I'm just going to go back to right now. It's in the user guidance. Yes, user guidance. It will be in your dashboard under existing service requests. So it'll show up here, and you'll see it'll have the status reason. It'll say open draft rather than open submitted. Or it could say open awaiting validation, meaning we just want to check your business information and have that all checked off before you proceed. I think my last thing I'll say, just because I know we're running out of time, is there is a way to submit payment online, and there is guidance about that. I won't have time to go into that, but there is this link to making a payment online in my CFIA. Basically, you'll be getting an email, which is a payment task notification that will look something like this, telling you to please log into your account and submit payment. And it has all the screenshots of how to do so. And actually, this is a very good screenshot, if you can see, of what the different service requests can look like and what information is needed. So you can see some different status reasons, right? Some of them might be awaiting payment, some of them are draft. This one says open submitted, meaning it's being finalized, whereas the one above is in progress awaiting validation. I think I'm going to close it up there. And just remember that if ever you have questions, we have so many online resources. And then as you are applying, if ever you have questions, you can call our 1-800 number. Although I do encourage everyone to just do a little bit of homework, get your documents in order, know how you want to sign up, and give it a try before giving us a call. But we'll be happy to help you through it if it's your first time.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Wendy. Didn't have a scheduled time here for some Q&As, but we've got some questions that I think you could probably respond to fairly quickly. And I think that more than one person would be interested in the response. Is it appropriate for independent consultants to set up a multiple party profile on my CFIA and enter each client as a separate business unit?
Ooh, that is a good one. So the independent consultant would be their own legal entity, is my question? It's going to be very case specific. I think it all comes down to who do you want to be legally responsible for the services you're requesting? Is it the consultant's clients who are actually legally responsible for the product, right? And the authorization, or is it the independent consultant who wants to be legally responsible? What could, not knowing all the complexities of the business decisions behind this, I'd say that perhaps that individual consultant would want to be added as a basically an employee or a party contact for all of their clients, so that they would be able to make service requests on behalf of the legal business.
Okay, so in that case, then they would actually create different
they might want to create different profiles, because multiple profiles means that certain people don't have access to see the other profiles.
Okay, we have a similar
if you need
question.
more info, do watch the video. Anna's pasta sauce video. It's bright and cheerful.
There's a similar question having to do with designated agents, and I think it would probably fall under the same, whether the agent is taking on the legal responsibility or whether the companies themselves would be. So I think that probably the video then again might provide some more clarity just based on their business. Another quick question. If you already have a GC key with another branch of government, do you need to create a new one for my CFIA?
No, as long as you know your username and password, you should be able to use that with us. It's the Government of Canada standard.
Okay.
I do see the question about large companies. The local directors should be able to sign the proof of authority form, especially if you can't connect with the big company CFOs. If there's, we might just ask you for further proof of business. So something that has that company's basically their name associated with the Canadian business information, right? So you can have a large global corporation, but in Canada, you would have a Canadian business number or other proof of incorporation in Canada, and you can get one of, likely get one of those Canadian branches to sign off.
Okay.
You do not need to be a Canadian citizen to use My CFIA. We do have several American companies who are signed up, but they have Canadian branches.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy.
All right.
Well, we're going to introduce some polling questions now that are going to come up on everybody's Zoom screen.
Sorry,
And,
Suzanne, can I just jump in? Sorry, sorry to interrupt and delay us.
No, that's okay.
Just in terms of the My CFIA, I think there's a bit of a balancing act that individual companies are going to have to make the decisions. As Wendy mentioned, it is about legal liability. This is a kind of we're entering into a contract in terms of the CFIA and making applications, and companies will have to decide who they want to have that responsibility. I wouldn't see an agent wanting to take on that legal responsibility for a number of companies. But then there's also who can see what. So there's how much work does the top dog want to do versus how much do they want to delegate versus how much compartmentalization do you want to do in terms of being able to see different activities and that legal responsibility. So it's a bit of a balance, but if you look at it with a little bit of a legal responsibility lens, I think that is a good balance against the workload management that individual companies will likely be doing as they walk through these decisions.
Okay, good. Thanks, Linda, for that. Okay, so now we'll switch to the polling questions. They're going to come up here on your Zoom screen. And these questions are meant to see which aspects of the new regulations that you'd like to have some more information on. I'm just going to turn that over to Eva if you want to add anything else to that, Eva.
Sure. So just to reiterate, we are planning to schedule subsequent webinars that will talk in a little bit more detail about given aspect of the regulations. And this poll is actually intended to see what are the topics that are of greatest interest to you. And based on that, we will schedule the webinars and obviously allow you to ask more, like you will have more time to ask questions during the webinars.
Eva, if you'd like to read the questions so that our interpreters can translate.
Sure. Do you understand the new regulations more now than before the presentation? The options that you have, yes, which obviously is the right answer. Somewhat or not at all. Do I just go through all of them, Suzanne, at the same time?
Yes, I would just continue through. I think everyone can move through them fairly quickly.
Okay. Which aspects of the new regulations would you like to have explained in more detail? And you can check more than one box if it is applicable. This is multiple choice. So your first area would be definitions and terminology, general prohibitions, safety standards, exemptions from the act and regulations. So general exemptions, exemption from registration from fertilizers, and exemption from registration for supplements, product-specific labeling requirements, and record keeping. Last but not least, would you like to hear more about phase-in implementation of the new regulatory framework and if you have any questions about available resources and reference materials, if you would like us to walk through them in detail. The other, obviously, element, thank you, Wendy, very much for your presentation. This was greatly appreciated. We are also hoping to, if merited and if requested, to run a bit of a session on the electronic submission. So would you benefit from a specific training session on electronic submissions? And if so, which aspects? You can check more than one box. So are you specifically interested in my CFIA portal and enrollment? Submitting application for registration or research authorization using the electronic submission platform, and how to pay online. And your feedback, as usual, is greatly appreciated and will allow us to to plan and schedule things that are actually of value to the regulated parties.
All right, thank you, Eva. I assume that this poll is going to stay up for a little while longer, and people will select it and submit it. And that's basically to give you some indication of what to focus on in these upcoming webinars and seminars, correct?
Correct.
All right. So I think that's about all the time that we have. Well, I have to say, this has certainly been CFIA Day. My head is full and it's starting to leak out a little bit, but that's a good thing. More information is better than less information. So I wanted to thank all of our presenters today from CFIA. You guys did a marvelous job of bringing some lots of complexity to us in a logical way. Certainly appreciate that. And Health Canada for providing the information as well. Patrick, appreciate it. It's great to have these open discussions where we can communicate with the government and on these important issues and ask questions. And I think I would personally say that probably one of the positive outcomes of this virtual conferencing thing is we're getting much broader reach in terms of people and getting the word out in terms of these kinds of things. And so I hope this kind of stuff is, you know, a bit of a wave of the future. Sure, I still like to get out every now and then, but lots of good things coming out of it. Also want to make sure that I thank WeStream, and today I think it's Brandon, but I know Kevin's in the back there as well, for their technical support for making this whole thing run. And of course, our translators that are in the background as well, providing the French translation for today's session. Want to remind everybody that we have a few more sessions coming up with our keynote speakers, Mark and Ben Cullen and Frankie Flowers. That's the closing event of CFPF on November 25th. And please visit the Fertilizer Canada website at fertilizercanada.ca to find those registration links. I think also in a couple of days, there's the session from FSAC that is going to have some other items come up as well.
Tim, it's Suzanne. I just wanted to make one comment. I've noticed there have been a few comments here that some people who are watching through their browsers are not seeing the polling questions. So perhaps, yeah, I see Glenn has said that they'll push the poll questions out, and maybe Allison, if you could coordinate that so that the questions would go out to the participants so that they have a chance to respond.
Sure, thanks for that, Suzanne. And a reminder to everyone, the questions will be forward that weren't answered will be forwarded to CFIA, and then they'll send the answers out to the people. So things that we didn't have time for today, you will see those, whoever asked the questions. Also, the presentations, both in English and French, will be available. I think Allison said somewhere around the end of November, so that's coming up pretty quickly. And I also want to give a big hand of thanks to Allison, who's been in the background, making all of these events run, and all the coordination and the wrestling of the sheep into one area, and us getting us through everything that we need to do. Certainly hope that this has been a worthwhile event for you. Thank you for having such good attention. And Suzanne, I'm going to close on my comments. I appreciate the opportunity to be a moderator. And I'll leave it to you, Suzanne, to close everything out.
I don't think I have anything more to add to that other than thank you again to Allison. I do concur. That's a lot of work to make these things move along smoothly, and we've got a lot of people in the background who are providing us with direction so that we can provide you with the best possible presentation. And don't forget again that we have the FSAC presentation in a couple days. And there's also the keynote speakers in next week on November 25th about gardening trends during COVID-19 and fast forwarding 10 years. Thanks to everyone who participated.
You all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.